The helicopter sound came first, low and distant, rolling across the Montana grasslands like thunder before a storm. Jack Morrison's hands froze on the feed bucket, grain spilling across weathered boots that had walked through more wars than most men could name. 62 years old, dark blonde hair now gray, a body that announced its decades of service with every movement. He'd learned to recognize the difference between memory and reality, but sometimes the line blurred until he couldn't tell which side he stood on. The sound roll grew louder, his breath shortened. The feed bucket hit the ground. Mogadishu, the Black Hawk spinning, smoke trailing like a dying bird. The screaming, the bodies, the dust that tasted like copper and cordite and failure. Hands on his shoulders, not real, never real, but he felt them anyway. His knees hit the dirt. The horses scattered. The Montana sky turned Somalia red. When the episode passed, when his lungs remembered how to pull air and his heart stopped trying to punch through his ribs, Jack found himself on his back, staring at clouds that looked nothing like smoke. The helicopter was a crop duster, already miles away. The war was over, had been over for 3 decades. His body just hadn't gotten the message. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and walked toward the house that held too many ghosts for one man to carry alone. The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of Montana wilderness, far enough from town that neighbors meant miles, not feet, quiet enough that a man could hear his own thoughts even when he desperately wanted silence. Catherine had loved it here. She'd spent 20 years convincing him that peace was possible, that wars ended, that soldiers could become human again. Then the cancer took her and proved that some battles couldn't be won no matter how hard you fought. Jack stood at her grave as the sun climbed toward noon, hat in weathered hands, speaking to stone the way he'd spoken to her living presence for 30 years. I had another one today. The helicopters. You'd have talked me through it, made tea, told me about the horses like nothing happened, made me believe I was more than the sum of broken parts. The stone offered no reply. It never did. But standing here felt like breathing, and breathing was about all he had left that resembled living. Inside the house, whiskey waited on the kitchen counter, 3 fingers deep in a glass that had become routine. Not enough to get drunk, just enough to sand the edges off memories that cut like broken glass. He'd made promises to Catherine about the drinking, promises he'd kept while she lived, promises that died with her, because what was the point of staying sober when the only person who cared was underground? The study held his other vice, walls covered in photographs spanning 40 years of service, faces young and old, living and dead. More dead than living now. Much more. The Navy SEAL trident mounted above the desk caught afternoon light, brass polished by hands that had nothing better to do than remember. David's photo occupied the center. Not the official military portrait with its crisp uniform and forced smile, but the candid shot from his last leave, standing on this very porch with coffee in hand and sunrise behind him, looking so much like his mother that Jack's chest tightened every time he saw it. Lieutenant David Morrison, SEAL Team 3, killed in action Syria 2019. 28 years old, lifetime ahead of him. Future stolen by men who traded lives for politics and called it strategy. The phone had rung that morning too. Unknown number from Washington. Jack let it go to voicemail because Washington only called when they wanted something, and he'd given them everything he had worth taking. It rang again and again. On the 4th call, he answered just to make it stop. Colonel Patricia Morrison here. I need to speak with Jack Morrison regarding a classified matter. Jack's voice came out rough from disuse. I'm retired, Colonel. Have been for 6 years. Whatever you need, find someone younger. This isn't about retirement, Mr. Morrison. This is about Vladimir Volkov. The name hit like a fist. Jack sat down hard in the desk chair, suddenly 62 years old and feeling every minute of it. Volkov died in '97. We confirmed it. I saw the intelligence. We were wrong. Morrison's voice carried the flat certainty of someone delivering news they'd already verified 6 different ways. He's alive. He's operational. And he's planning something that makes 9/11 look like a warm-up. Jack's free hand found the whiskey glass, empty now, wishing it wasn't. Why call me? I've been out of the game since Catherine got sick. My war's over, Colonel. Because this one's personal. Morrison paused and Jack heard paper rustling, someone making a decision about how much truth to share. It's about your son. The glass shattered against the wall before Jack realized he'd thrown it. 2 days later, he stood in a Pentagon briefing room that smelled like recycled air and stale coffee, surrounded by people young enough to be his children, playing videos that showed his son's last moments on Earth. The footage came from David's helmet camera, grainy, night vision green, showing a Syrian compound through the scope of an HK-416. David's breathing steady in the audio track, professional, calm, exactly the way Jack had trained him. Then the ambush, muzzle flashes from 3 directions, David's camera spinning as he took cover, returning fire, calling for support that would arrive too late. And the voice, unmistakable even through static and gunfire. Vladimir Volkov, speaking English with that Moscow accent softened by decades living in shadows. Your father and I are old friends, Lieutenant Morrison. Did he ever tell you about Berlin? About the games we played when the wall still stood? No, pity. We could have told you such stories. David's breathing harder now, wounded, cornered. He never mentioned you. Volkov's laugh, dry as desert wind. Of course not. Men like your father don't speak of their failures. And I am his greatest failure, yes? The one who got away. The ghost he could never catch. The camera shook. David was hit again. Tell him I remember Catherine. The flowers he sent to her funeral, the speech he gave. Very touching, very American. All those pretty words about service and sacrifice. Volkov's voice dropped lower, intimate, cruel. Tell him I'm going to make those words meaningless. Tell him everything he fought for, everything he believes, every soldier who died following his orders, all of it was for nothing. Tell him the war never ended. It just stopped pretending to be about freedom. The camera went black. Audio continued for another 30 seconds. Boots on concrete, David's labored breathing. Then a single gunshot and silence that stretched for the remaining 7 hours of runtime. Jack stood motionless in the darkened briefing room, watching his son die on repeat because Morrison had cued it to loop. Someone cleared their throat. The lights came up. Faces turned toward him, expecting reaction, emotion, something they could quantify in their reports. He gave them nothing but 4 words. When do I start? Dr. Robert Chen waited in a smaller office down the hall, looking older than Jack remembered. They'd met during the Gulf War in '91 when Jack was running operations out of Kuwait, and Chen was CIA analyst, coordinating intelligence for Special Operations Command. 3 decades later, they'd both survived careers that killed most men in spirit before the body followed. Chen's hand trembled slightly as he poured coffee. Heart condition, he said, catching Jack's notice. Ticker's giving out. Doctor says maybe a year, probably less. Figured I'd spend it doing something useful. Jack accepted the coffee, always did have a gift for optimism. They sat in companionable silence that came from decades knowing each other's ghosts. Eventually, Chen pushed a file folder across the desk, thick with documents marked with classifications that would put most people in prison for seeing. What they told you in there? That's the sanitized version. The story they want you to believe so you'll do what they need. The truth is messier. It always is. Chen opened the folder. Volkov didn't capture David randomly. Your son was investigating something. Something that got him killed before he could report it. Which was? Corruption in JSOC. Someone's been leaking operational intelligence to Volkov for at least 5 years. David got close to identifying the source. 24 hours later, he was dead in Syria with Volkov standing over him. Jack processed this the way he'd processed bad intelligence in the field, turning it over, checking for weak points, seeing where it connected to patterns he already knew. Who's the leak? That's what you're here to find out. Chen pulled out a surveillance photo showing a man in his late 50s entering an office building. James Hartley. Colonel James Hartley. The name hit harder than Volkov's had. Jack and Hartley went back to Beirut '83, to the barracks bombing that killed 221 Marines and should have killed them both. They'd served together through Panama, Gulf War, Somalia. Hartley had been at Catherine's funeral, had delivered one of the eulogies, had stood beside Jack at David's memorial service and sworn they'd get justice. You're telling me Hartley betrayed my son? I'm telling you to investigate carefully. Morrison doesn't know I'm sharing this. She brought you in for your connection to Volkov, but she's not asking the right questions about how Volkov keeps staying 2 steps ahead. Why not? Chen's smile was tired, because maybe she doesn't want the answers. The door opened without knocking. A woman in combat utilities, late 20s, moving with the controlled efficiency of someone who'd earned their place in rooms full of men twice her size and twice her age. Staff Sergeant Sarah Castellanos, according to the name tape. Seal, according to the trident on her chest. Mr. Morrison? Colonel Morrison assigned me as your handler for this operation. Jack's jaw tightened. I don't need a babysitter, Sergeant, especially not someone young enough to be my granddaughter. Sarah's expression didn't shift. With respect, sir, Lieutenant David Morrison trained me personally. He talked about you constantly. How you taught him everything about being a SEAL before the Navy ever got hold of him. How you were the best tactical mind in naval special warfare history. How, if anything ever happened to him, I should find you and learn whatever you were willing to teach. The anger drained out of Jack like water from cupped hands. David trained you. Yes, sir. For 2 years before his death. He saved my life in Kandahar. Took shrapnel meant for me. Spent 3 weeks in Germany recovering and never once complained. Just kept talking about getting back to the team. Getting back to the mission. She paused and Jack saw grief flash across her face before professional composure locked it down. I owe him everything, sir. If you're going after the people who killed him, I'm coming with you. Colonel Morrison's orders or not, I'm coming with you. Jack looked at her properly for the first time. Saw David in the way she stood, the set of her shoulders, the absolute certainty that brooked no argument. Catherine would have liked her. Catherine would have invited her to dinner, asked about her family, treated her like the daughter they'd never had. Fine, but I lead and you follow. I've been doing this since before you were born. If I tell you to do something, you do it without question. Understood? Understood, sir. They flew to Syria 48 hours later on a transport that rattled like it had been shot at once too often and held together with prayer and baling wire. Jack sat in silence, watching younger soldiers sleep the easy sleep of people who hadn't yet learned that wars never really ended. Sarah sat across from him, cleaning her rifle with the repetitive motions of ritual, occasionally glancing up to check if he needed anything. He didn't need anything except his son back, and that was one mission even God couldn't authorize. The compound where David died sat in territory contested by so many factions that maps used question marks instead of borders. American forces maintained minimal presence, just enough to say they hadn't completely abandoned allies, not enough to actually change anything. The Syrian government pretended not to notice. The Russians pretended to help. Everyone lied to everyone else and called it diplomacy. Jack and Sarah arrived at 0300 in a vehicle that looked like every other technical in the region, driven by a contractor who asked no questions because he was paid specifically not to. The compound was dark, abandoned, exactly as intelligence predicted. The terrorist cell that had occupied it moved on after David's death, ghosts themselves now, scattered to other holes and other forgotten places. Sarah moved to enter first. Jack stopped her with a hand signal, honed by 4 decades of practice. Let me. She hesitated, then nodded, taking overwatch position while Jack approached the entrance. The smell hit him first, decaying cordite and something older, something that lived in places where men died badly. His NVGs turned darkness into green-tinged clarity, showing walls marked by bullet impacts, floors stained with substances better left unexamined. David had died in the northeast corner. Jack knew because he'd memorized every frame of that helmet footage, every angle, every shadow. The bloodstain was still there, faded but visible, marking the place where his son had bled out alone, while Volkov delivered philosophical speeches about the meaninglessness of American empire. Jack knelt beside the stain, removed his glove, placed his palm flat against concrete that held the last moments of his son's life. I'm sorry, should have been here, should have stopped this, should have done so many things differently. The words fell into darkness and died there. Useless, too late, inadequate for the weight they carried. He found David's personal effects in a corner where they'd been tossed or overlooked. Dog tags, wallet, phone dead from months without charge. The wallet held the usual detritus of a soldier's life. Photos of his parents, both alive, and images that felt like archaeological artifacts from another age. A ticket stub from a Padres game. $23 and a California driver's license that would never be renewed. And a journal, small, weathered, filled with David's handwriting. Jack opened it with hands that shook despite years of training designed to eliminate such weakness. Scanned entries that chronicled the mission, the investigation, the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with the intelligence they'd received. Dad was right about Volkov. The entry was dated 2 weeks before David's death. He's not just an enemy. He's a ghost from our past, and ghosts don't die easily. They linger. They poison. They turn everything around them into haunted ground. Further down the page, Someone in command is feeding him information. Has to be someone high up. Someone who knew our deployment schedules, our routes, our safe houses. Someone who wanted us dead. The final entry was written hours before the ambush. Found evidence. Solid proof. Can't trust normal channels. Going to sit on this until I can get it directly to someone I trust. If something happens to me, if I don't make it back, someone needs to know. The corruption goes higher than anyone suspects. They're not just leaking intelligence. They're actively working with Volkov to destabilize operations. And I think I know who. The name was torn out, deliberately, violently, leaving only ragged paper edge and implications that settled in Jack's chest like broken glass. Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. Movement, east perimeter. Two individuals approaching on foot. Jack moved to the window, rifle up, scope settling on figures that resolved into locals. Unarmed civilians, probably scavengers, hoping to find something valuable in abandoned buildings that dotted the landscape like tombstones. Stand down, civilians. But Sarah's voice came back tight with tension. Sir, one of them is carrying something. Radio maybe, or detonator. Jack's scope found the object. Definitely electronic, definitely wrong for this context. Weapons free if they make aggressive movement. I'm going out the back. He moved through the compound with muscle memory older than some of the soldiers he'd commanded, flowing through shadows, using terrain and structure the way younger men use speed. Came up behind the two figures as they reached the compound entrance. One turned, saw him, reached for the device. Jack's shot took him in the shoulder, precise, disabling, designed to wound, not kill. The second figure froze, hands up, speaking rapid Arabic that Jack's rusty understanding caught pieces of. No shooting, no shooting. We are friends. We have message. From who? The wounded man grimaced but managed words. From the Russian, the ghost. He says to tell Jack Morrison that he has been waiting, that the game begins again, that this time there will be no stalemate. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. Where is he? Gone. Always gone, but he left this. The man fumbled one-handed in his jacket, moving slowly, carefully, extracting a phone. This for you. Sarah arrived at Jack's 6, rifle trained on both men. What's happening? Message from Volkov. Jack took the phone, old model, probably disposable, powered it on. A video loaded automatically. Volkov's face filled the screen, older than Jack remembered. Scarred, weathered, but unmistakably the man who'd haunted 40 years of nightmares. Hello, old friend. I have been waiting for you. Knew you would come to this place. Knew you would need to see where your son died. Americans are so sentimental about their dead. Volkov's smile held no warmth. You took everything from me in the Cold War, Jack. My career, my reputation, my family. My daughter will not speak to me. She changed her name, moved to America ironically, became the thing I spent my life fighting. Because of you. Because you made me into monster in her eyes. The camera angle widened, showing Volkov in what looked like a command center. Maps, computers, the apparatus of modern warfare conducted from shadows. Now I return the favor. I am going to show you what your wars accomplished, what your service meant, what your son died for. Nothing. Less than nothing. A lie wrapped in flag and sold to families who trusted you to give their children honorable purpose. Volkov leaned closer to the camera. I have named this operation Red October. Poetic, yes? In 30 days, 7 targets across America will experience what you have exported to the world for 7 decades. Fire, death, terror. And when your government responds with the predictable fury of wounded empire, the world will finally see you for what you are. The video ended. The phone screen went dark. Jack handed it to Sarah. Get this to intelligence. Every frame analyzed. I want to know where that room is, what those maps show, anything that gives us a location. And you, sir, I'm going to call in old favors. Talk to people who remember the Cold War, people who know how Volkov thinks. The wounded man spoke again, weaker now. Russian says one more thing. Says to look close to home for betrayer. Says the traitor sits at table with eagles. JSOC, the realization hit Jack like cold water. Volkov was confirming what Chen suspected. Sarah keyed her radio. Command, this is Wraith 6 actual. We need immediate exfil and medical for 2 civilians. Possible intelligence value. Negative Wraith 6. The voice that came back made Jack's blood freeze. Stand down and await further orders. Colonel Morrison's voice, clipped, authoritative, wrong. You are ordered to maintain position and avoid contact with any personnel until relieved. Sarah looked at Jack. She's telling us to wait here, in an exposed position, in hostile territory. Jack's tactical sense, honed by decades of staying alive in places designed to kill him, screamed warnings. He moved to the window, scanned the perimeter. Two vehicles approaching fast from the north. No lights, no identification, not friendly. Sarah saw them too. That's not relief. That's containment. Jack made the decision that would define everything that followed. Grab the civilians, we're leaving, now. They moved fast, Sarah half carrying the wounded man, Jack covering their retreat. The compound erupting behind them as the vehicles arrived and men spilled out with weapons hot and intentions clear. Someone wanted them dead. Someone with enough authority to order their exfil canceled and a kill team scrambled. Someone who knew they'd found David's journal. Someone who knew what that journal might contain. They made it 2 clicks before Sarah's radio crackled again. Different voice this time, familiar. Jack Morrison, this is Colonel James Hartley. Stand down. You are ordered to surrender to friendly forces for debriefing. This is not negotiable. Jack and Sarah exchanged glances in the darkness. The wounded civilian between them groaned softly. Behind them, vehicle engines grew closer. Hartley's voice again, softer now, almost pleading. Jack, please, don't make this harder than it has to be. I can explain everything. Just come in. Let's talk this through like old times. Jack thought about Beirut, about Somalia, about decades of trust built in blood and fire. Thought about David's journal entry, about corruption that went higher than anyone suspected. Made his choice. He pulled Sarah's radio free and keyed it once, twice, 3 times. The signal that meant message received, but compliance denied. The signal every operator knew meant you were going dark, off reservation, beyond help. Then he smashed the radio under his boot and looked at Sarah. From here on, we're on our own. No support, no backup, no extraction if this goes wrong. You can still walk away. Find the nearest American position. Tell them I went rogue. Save your career. Sarah checked her rifle, chambered around, met his eyes without flinching. David told me you'd say something like that. Told me what to answer. Which is, where you go, I go. Until the mission's done or we're both dead. Those were his words exactly. Jack felt something move in his chest, some muscle he'd thought calcified by grief. Not quite hope, not quite purpose. Something between the two. Then we better not die. I don't think Catherine would forgive me if I got you killed. They moved into darkness that swallowed them completely. Behind them, Hartley's voice echoed through abandoned ruins calling for surrender that would never come. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns unchanged since humans first learned to wage war. Ahead of them, 30 days until Red October, answers buried in layers of betrayal, and the ghost of Vladimir Volkov, waiting with patience, learned from decades playing long games that left no winners, only survivors. Jack's hands no longer shook. His breathing steadied. The years fell away like shed skin, and underneath was the operator he'd been before grief and age tried to convince him that fighting was finished. Hartley had made 2 mistakes. First, assuming Jack would surrender. Second, forgetting that cornered SEALs didn't surrender. They adapted, improvised, and turned every disadvantage into weapon. The game was on. The ghost had challenged him. The betrayer had shown his face. And Jack Morrison, 62 years old, dying inside but not dead yet, decided that if this was his last mission, his final operation, his closing act, then he'd make it count for something more than just survival. He'd make it count for truth, for David, for every soldier sent to die in wars built on lies and decorated with flags. The last ghost was going to war one final time, and when the dust settled, when the bodies were counted and the truth finally dragged into light, everyone would remember that old warriors don't fade away gracefully. They burn, and sometimes in burning, they light the path for those who follow. Montana felt very far away. Catherine's grave and quiet mornings and the pretense of peace seemed like another life, another man, another set of choices that led somewhere different than this moment. But maybe that man had always been pretense. Maybe the warrior underneath never really retired, just waited, patient and cold, for someone to give him permission to be what he'd always been. A weapon, aimed at truth, fired by duty, ready to pay whatever price the mission demanded. The safe house existed in the kind of neighborhood where questions died before they were asked, where cash spoke louder than curiosity, where 3 decades of CIA operations had established networks that outlived the operatives who built them. Robert Chen had arranged it with 2 phone calls and a wire transfer that would never appear on any government ledger. The kind of tradecraft that belonged to an era when intelligence work meant knowing people instead of algorithms. Jack sat in darkness watching headlights paint patterns across water-stained walls, while Sarah treated the wounded Syrian's shoulder with supplies from a kit that looked older than she was. The man's name was Tariq, and he'd stopped screaming an hour ago, which meant either the morphine worked or shock had accomplished what medicine couldn't. The journal lay open on a table scarred by cigarette burns and decades of classified conversations. David's handwriting covered page after page, neat, precise letters that documented the last months of his life, with the clinical detachment of someone who knew the information might outlive them. Sarah finished bandaging and moved to the window, rifle ready, eyes scanning approaches that offered too many angles and not enough cover. Every headlight made her shoulders tense. Every sound brought her weapon up. She was good, Jack recognized. David had trained her well, but good wasn't enough when the enemy knew your playbook and wrote the rules. How long do we have? Her voice cut through darkness like a blade through still water. Jack checked his watch, a mechanical piece from the 80s that had survived more operations than most soldiers. Until Chen gets us new identities and transport, maybe 6 hours. Until Hartley figures out which safe house we're using, less. And then we move again. Keep moving until we find answers or they find us. Sarah turned from the window, face half shadow, half ambient glow from streetlights that flickered like dying stars. In Somalia, when you saved Hartley's life, did you see something? Some sign he'd turn? Jack thought back 30 years to heat and dust and bodies and streets, where American intervention met Somali reality in ways that shattered illusions about easy victories. Remembered carrying Hartley through gunfire after shrapnel opened his leg from knee to hip. Remembered the weight of him, the blood that made everything slippery, the whispered thanks that seemed genuine at the time. No, he was a good soldier, better than good, smart, capable, loyal to the men beside him. But Somalia changed people. Not fast like an explosion, slow like rust. You come back from something like that, and the world doesn't make sense anymore. Rules feel arbitrary. Authority feels distant. And somewhere in that space between what you believed and what you saw, something breaks. Like you? Jack's laugh held no humor. Yeah, like me. Except I had Catherine to pull me back from the edge. Had David to remind me why the fight mattered. Hartley had a wife who left him, and kids who stopped calling, and a career that demanded more pieces of soul than he had left to give. That doesn't excuse betrayal. No, it just explains it. Understanding isn't forgiveness, but it helps you predict what someone will do next. Hartley's not evil. He's broken. And broken people are more dangerous than evil ones because they believe they're doing the right thing even when they're burning the world down. Tariq stirred, spoke in accented English, thick with pain and drugs. The Russian, he knows you are coming, knows you will not stop. Says this is good. Says game is better when opponent is worthy. Jack moved to the injured man's side. What else did Volkov say? That you already know, traitor, but cannot accept it. That truth hides behind friendship and loyalty blinds like desert sun. That by time you see clearly, Red October will be unstoppable. How many attacks? What are the targets? 7. All same day, all cities with symbols. He listed them, voice fading. New York, Washington, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, Houston. Places that bleed America when cut. Sarah pulled out a tablet, fingers moving across screen with practiced efficiency. Those cities, all at once, we're talking thousands of casualties minimum. Infrastructure damage, economic impact. This isn't terrorism, this is strategic warfare disguised as terrorism. Jack studied the list, patterns emerging from decades of threat assessment. Each city represented something: financial power, political power, cultural influence, energy sector, technology hub. The targets weren't random. They were carefully chosen to demonstrate that nowhere was safe, that American power was illusion, that the empire had no clothes. It's a message. Jack's voice carried the weight of understanding something terrible. Volkov's not trying to destroy America. He's trying to expose it. Show the world that all our military might, All our intelligence apparatus, all our wars and interventions can't protect us on our own soil. Sarah set down the tablet. So we stop him, warn the targets, increase security, and prove his point. Jack shook his head. The moment we go loud with this, the moment it becomes official, Morrison and whoever else is involved will bury it, classify it, control the narrative. They'll neutralize the threat through channels that require congressional approval and interagency coordination, which means committees and delays and political considerations. Meanwhile, Volkov adjusts his timeline and attacks while everyone's still debating jurisdiction. Then what do? We hunt him the old way, quietly, using people and instinct instead of satellites and databases. We find him before Red October launches, and we end this permanently. The phone Chen had provided buzzed once. Text message, encrypted, coordinates and a time. Pickup location for new transport, 6 hours from now at a rest stop 3 states away. Below that, a second message that made Jack's chest tighten. Hartley just authorized a kill order. You're officially designated hostile. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. They're not trying to capture you anymore. Sarah read over his shoulder. So we're enemies of the state now. We're liabilities. Jack powered down the phone, removed the battery, dropped both pieces in separate trash bins. People who know too much always become liabilities eventually. Catherine used to say the difference between hero and traitor was just which side won and who wrote the history. What did you say to that? That she was probably right and it terrified me. They moved Tariq to a bedroom that smelled like mildew and regret, made him as comfortable as morphine and improvised medicine allowed. The Syrian grabbed Jack's wrist with surprising strength. Why you fight? You are old man. Retire, live quiet. Why this? Jack thought about Montana mornings and Catherine's grave and David's photos gathering dust in a study that felt like a mausoleum. Thought about 40 years of service that ended with his son dead and corruption rotting the institutions he'd bled for. Because someone has to, and because if I don't, my son died for nothing. Tariq's grip loosened. All our sons die for nothing. That is nature of war. Old men make decisions. Young men pay price. Always same story. Maybe. But maybe I can change the ending this time. The Syrian's eyes closed. Inshallah, God willing. But God has not been willing for a long time in my country. Why would he start now in yours? Jack had no answer for that. Never had been particularly religious despite Catherine's best efforts to save his soul along with his sanity. Hard to believe in benevolent deity when you'd seen what men did to each other in his name. Sarah took first wattage while Jack tried to sleep in a chair that had supported too many bodies over too many years. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams where David's voice echoed through Syrian compounds, and Volkov's laughter followed him through corridors that twisted back on themselves endlessly. 3 hours before pickup, Chen called on a number that wouldn't be traceable for at least another day. Hartley's activated every asset he has. FBI's looking for you under domestic terrorism protocols. CIA's got international alerts. Even NSA's running facial recognition sweeps at major transport hubs. You're the most wanted men in America right now, and nobody outside JSOC knows why. Jack's voice stayed level. Can you get us out? I can get you new identities good enough for 48 hours. After that, depends how motivated they are to find you. Chen coughed, wet and painful. My guy in forensics says the phone from Syria had metadata. Volkov's been in the States for 3 months, moving between cities, always one step ahead of surveillance. Which means he has real-time intelligence on our counterterrorism operations. Chen's silence confirmed it. I pulled Hartley's phone records going back 5 years. Encrypted calls to numbers in Moscow, Damascus, Tehran. Pattern matches known intelligence officers. This isn't recent compromise, Jack. This is long-term penetration. Why? What's Hartley getting out of this? That's the question. Money doesn't fit his profile, ideology neither. Blackmail maybe, but what could they have on him that's worth betraying his country? Jack remembered Somalia, remembered things done in heat and chaos that never made official reports, remembered Hartley standing over prisoners with expression that suggested humanity was optional when revenge felt justified. War crimes. He did things in Somalia we all agreed to forget, but someone didn't forget. Someone documented it, probably Volkov. He was SVR back then, had assets embedded everywhere. If he had proof, if he threatened exposure, Hartley would lose everything. Pension, reputation, freedom. Probably face war crimes tribunal. So he traded intelligence to protect himself. Chen coughed again, longer this time. And in protecting himself, he sent your son into ambush. Sent dozens of operators into compromise operations. Got American soldiers killed to preserve his image. The rage that filled Jack was cold and precise. The kind of anger that bypassed emotion and became tactical calculation. Where is he now? Secure facility outside D.C. You'd need a battalion to reach him. Jack thought about this. Thought about options and probabilities and acceptable losses. Then give me what I need to make him come to me. 3 hours later, they drove a sedan that had belonged to 3 different people in the last week toward coordinates Chen had provided with instructions that amounted to suicide with extra steps. Sarah handled the wheel with the calm competence of someone who'd driven through worse, though probably not much worse. The Syrian stayed behind, too injured to travel, with enough money and contacts to disappear into communities that existed parallel to American society without ever quite touching it. The location was an abandoned industrial park outside Baltimore, the kind of place where manufacturing died and nothing grew in the poisoned soil it left behind. Rusted machinery stood like metal fossils, testifying to an economy that moved on without looking back. Perfect place for conversation nobody wanted recorded. Sarah parked where exit routes stayed open and approach vectors offered no cover. Checked her rifle, spare magazines, sidearm, knife. Professional routine of someone preparing for outcomes measured in split seconds. If this goes wrong, Jack said quietly, if Hartley brought shooters instead of answers, you run. Don't try to fight. Don't try to save me. Just run and make sure someone tells the truth about what happened here. Sarah chambered around. I didn't come this far to run. David would want you to survive. David would want justice. Sarah's eyes met his without flinching. And sometimes justice requires witnesses. So I stay. Headlights appeared in distance. Single vehicle. Moving slowly, cautiously. Jack recognized the pattern. Hartley driving himself. No backup, no support. Either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. And Hartley had never been stupid. The vehicle stopped 50 meters away. Lights died. Door opened. James Hartley emerged looking older than Jack remembered. Grayer, thinner, carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical mass. They met in space between vehicles. 2 old soldiers in industrial wasteland, surrounded by monuments to dead American dreams. Hartley spoke first. Jack, we need to talk about this rationally. Rational died when you killed my son. I didn't kill David. Hartley's voice carried genuine pain. I gave Volkov deployment schedules. I didn't know he'd target David specifically. When I found out, when I realized what happened, it destroyed me. But you kept working with him, kept feeding intelligence, kept getting soldiers killed. Because if I stopped, if I refused, he'd release the Somalia footage. Everything we did, everything you helped cover up. We'd both go to prison, Jack. Everything we built, everything we fought for, erased. Jack let silence stretch between them like razor wire. So you chose your reputation over American lives. I chose survival. Same choice you'd make in my position. No, Jack's voice carried absolute certainty. I'd have come forward, accepted consequences, taken the prison time, because that's what honor means. Not doing right thing when it's easy, doing it when it costs everything. Hartley laughed, bitter and broken. Honor. You really still believe in that? After Gulf War lies? After WMDs that didn't exist? After 20 years in Afghanistan achieving nothing? You still think we fought for something noble? We fought because we believed. What we discovered later doesn't change what we believed then. Belief is luxury of the naive. Hartley's composure cracked. I stopped believing in Mogadishu when I watched Somalis drag American bodies through streets and our government declared mission accomplished. I stopped believing when politicians sent us to die for oil and called it democracy. I stopped believing when every war we won led to 3 more we couldn't. Jack heard truth in the words. Recognized the corrosion of faith that happened so slowly you didn't notice until you looked back and saw how far you'd fallen. So you justified betrayal, made it philosophical instead of criminal. I made it practical. Hartley pulled out a flask, drank, offered it to Jack, who refused. Volkov's right about one thing. This country exports violence and calls it freedom. We're not heroes. We're enforcers for corporate interest with better marketing. Maybe, but that doesn't make terrorism justice. Doesn't make it wrong either. Hartley's eyes held challenge. Red October targets aren't innocent. Defense contractors who profited from endless war, politicians who voted for invasions, oil executives who funded destabilization, media moguls who sold narratives. Every target earned what's coming. And the secretaries? The janitors? The children in nearby buildings? Did they earn it too? Hartley had no answer for that. Or maybe the answer was in his silence, in the calculation that some deaths were acceptable if the message landed. Sarah's voice cut through tension. Sir, we have company. Headlights, multiple vehicles, coming fast from 3 directions. Jack turned to Hartley. You brought them. No, Hartley looked genuinely surprised. I came alone. This is Morrison. She must have tracked you through me. Or through you. Sarah's rifle came up. This was set up from the start. Hartley backed toward his vehicle. Jack, I swear I didn't know. Morrison must have surveillance on me. Must have known I'd try to meet you. Jack made decisions measured in heartbeats. Sarah, south exit. Now, what about you? I'll buy time. Go. She hesitated 1 second, maybe less, then ran with the efficient speed of someone who'd trained for exactly this situation. Hartley dove into his vehicle, engine roaring to life, tires screaming as he accelerated toward the only gap in approaching vehicles. Jack didn't run. Stood his ground in industrial wasteland watching 3 SUVs converge with kind of tactical precision that meant Morrison had sent professionals. The vehicles stopped in formation that blocked all exits except the one Sarah had taken. Doors opened. Operators emerged wearing tactical gear and expressions that suggested compliance was preferable to resistance, but either worked fine. Colonel Morrison stepped out last, moving with authority of someone used to obedience. She approached until 10 meters separated them, close enough for conversation, far enough that Jack couldn't close distance before her operators reacted. Mr. Morrison, stand down. This doesn't have to end badly. Already ended badly. My son's dead. My country's compromised. My friend's a traitor. How much worse can it get? You could join him. Morrison's gesture encompassed the wasteland. Dead in Industrial Park. Another casualty of paranoia and poor decisions. Or you could come in, debrief properly, let us handle Volkov through appropriate channels. Like you handled the intelligence Hartley was leaking? Like you handled my son's murder? Morrison's expression didn't shift. We're handling it now. Hartley's been contained. His network's being rolled up. Red October will be prevented through proper counterterrorism operations. And when it becomes public that JSOC was penetrated, that American soldiers died because of corruption in command, it won't become public. Morrison's voice carried finality. That information is classified at presidential level. Disclosure would damage national security. Jack understood then. Understood completely. The truth doesn't matter to you, just containing it, maintaining illusion that the system works. The system does work. It's messy, imperfect, sometimes corrupt, but it works better than the alternative. And sometimes protecting that system means making hard choices about what the public needs to know. Who decides? Who gets to choose which truths matter? People like me. Morrison's honesty was almost refreshing. People who understand that absolute truth is luxury we can't afford. People who see bigger picture. And people like my son, the soldiers who die because you're protecting corrupt officers, casualties of necessary operations. Morrison's words landed like bullets. I'm sorry about David, truly, but his death serves larger purpose if it helps us maintain operational security and prevent greater casualties. Jack's hands stayed relaxed, non-threatening, while his mind calculated angles and distances and probabilities of survival that didn't favor him regardless. You really believe that. You've convinced yourself that covering up treason is patriotic. I believe in the mission. Everything else is details. The operators tensed. Morrison raised a hand, keeping them in check, but ready. Last chance, Jack. Come in. Help us close this properly. Or stay out here and become collateral damage to your own stubbornness. Jack thought about Catherine, about promises made at her grave, about David's journal and the names torn from pages and the troops that died in Syrian compounds, while men like Morrison decided what mattered. Made his choice. Tell me one thing first. Did you know Hartley was compromised before you sent David? Morrison's silence was answer enough. You knew. Jack's voice stayed level despite rage that threatened to crack his chest open. You knew, and you sent my son anyway. Used him as bait to draw out Volkov. Sacrificed him for operational advantage. It wasn't personal. It was tactical. Morrison actually looked regretful. David was good soldier. Best of his generation. That's why he was chosen, because Volkov would take the bait. How long? How long have you known? 6 months before David's death. Chen figured it out first. Brought me evidence. We decided to use the situation rather than shut it down prematurely. You murdered my son. Might as well have pulled trigger yourself. I made hard choice. Same choice you've made dozens of times in your career. Morrison's eyes held challenge. How many soldiers did you send into danger knowing some wouldn't return? How many operations did you authorize where casualties were expected? You don't get to stand on moral high ground, Jack. You built that ground with same bodies I'm standing on. The words landed because they were true. Jack had sent men to die, had made tactical decisions where some soldiers were expendable if missions succeeded, had prioritized objectives over individuals more times than he could count. But never like this. Never betrayed them first. Semantics, Morrison gestured to our operators. Take him. They moved forward professionally, weapons trained, spacing maintained. Jack didn't resist. Let them approach within 5 meters. 4, 3. Sarah's shot took the lead operator in the shoulder. Precise, disabling, fired from position she'd established on rooftop 200 meters away. The operator scattered, returning fire, tactics shifting from capture to combat. Jack moved during confusion. Not toward Morrison, toward nearest vehicle. Reached it before operators adjusted, used it as cover. Engine blocks stopping rounds that would have ended discussion permanently. Morrison's voice cut through gunfire. Cease fire! Cease fire! He's contained. We can wait him out. But Jack wasn't waiting. Had already identified the vehicle's weak point, the place where industrial machinery stood rusting beside a drainage system that led toward tunnels built when this park still manufactured things. Moved fast for 62, using terrain and chaos, reaching the tunnel entrance as Sarah provided covering fire that kept operators pinned. Dropped into darkness that smelled like decades of neglect. Behind him, Morrison's voice echoed with fury. Find him. I want him alive if possible. Dead if necessary. But find him. Jack moved through tunnels that probably violated every safety code written, guided by memory and instinct, and small flashlight that barely pushed back darkness. Sarah would know to reach extraction point. Chen would have backup plan. The mission would continue. 30 days to Red October. Maybe less if Volkov adjusted timeline. Every hour in hiding was hour closer to attacks that would kill thousands. The tunnel opened into culvert beside highway where semis screamed past at speeds that made hitchhiking complicated but possible. Jack climbed out of underground, covered in rust and chemical residue, looking exactly like what he was. A ghost, hunted by the government he'd served, chasing enemy he couldn't catch, running out of time and options. A semi slowed. Driver was old, 70s maybe, with eyes that suggested he'd seen things and didn't ask questions about men who emerged from tunnels looking haunted. Need a ride, friend? Jack climbed into cab that smelled like diesel and coffee, and long roads stretching toward horizons that never got closer. Anywhere but here. The driver pulled back onto highway. Name's Earl. 62 years driving these roads. Seen lots of things, learned to mind my business. Jack appreciated the discretion. How far are you going? Far as you need. Earl glanced at him. Quick assessment, then back to road. You got that look. Same look my nephew had when he came back from Iraq. Same look I see in mirrors sometimes from things I saw in the Gulf. You served? 2 tours. Artillery battalion. Desert Storm and the mop-up after. Came home to world that didn't want to hear what happened. Found peace in driving. Road don't judge. They drove in silence, punctuated by tire sounds and wind, and the rhythm of highway that lulled men into conversations they wouldn't have in daylight with witnesses. Earl spoke again after 30 miles. Whatever you're running from, hope it's worth it. Not running from, running toward. Big difference. Earl nodded like he understood. My nephew said same thing, right before he ate his service pistol in garage while his kids slept inside. The words hung in cab like smoke. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choice. We all do. Earl's hands stayed steady on wheel. Just make sure whatever you're running toward is worth more than what you're leaving behind. Jack thought about Montana, about mornings feeding horses and afternoons at Catherine's grave and nights drinking just enough to sleep. About peace he'd built from wreckage and was now abandoning for mission that might mean nothing. It's worth it. Then that's all that matters. They drove until dawn, painted sky colors that reminded Jack of wounds, and Earl dropped him at rest stop where Chen had arranged extraction, Sarah waited in parking lot, alive, unharmed, ready for whatever came next. Earl pulled away without looking back. Another ghost on road that stretched forever in both directions. Sarah handed Jack coffee from a machine that probably violated health codes. Morrison's mobilized everything. FBI, Homeland Security, even local police have our descriptions. We're officially domestic terrorists. Chen's intelligence? Comprehensive. She showed him tablet displaying files that represented decades of Chen's career. Every operation, every cover-up, every dirty secret, set to release automatically if Chen doesn't check in every 12 hours. Mutually assured destruction. Old school. Old school works when new school's been corrupted. Sarah's expression was grim, but we have bigger problem. Chen sent final message 20 minutes ago. Jack took tablet, read words that hit harder than Morrison's bullets would have. Heart attack. In hospital. Maybe hours left. Use the information wisely. Finish what we started. Sorry, I can't see the end. Chen. Another ghost joining the collection Jack carried. Another good man paying price for institutional rot. We need to move. Sarah's voice pulled him back. Chen's files give us locations. Volkov's been staying in places connected to defense contractors on target list. 4 cities. We can narrow it down. Not we. Jack returned the tablet. You need to disappear. Get the files to journalists Chen trusted. Make sure truth comes out regardless of what happens to me. After everything we've been through, you're really giving me the heroic sacrifice speech? Someone needs to survive this. Someone needs to tell true story. Then we both survive. Sarah's eyes held determination that reminded him uncomfortably of David. No more splitting up. No more protecting me because you see your son. I'm here by choice. I stay by choice. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to invoke authority or experience or age. But looking at her, he saw what David must have seen. Not someone needing protection, someone choosing to stand regardless of cost. Fine, but we do this my way. Old school tactics, low tech, human intelligence over databases. Agreed, Sarah smiled slightly. Though for record, old school got us this far. Old school kept us alive this far. Big difference. They moved toward vehicle Chen had arranged. Common sedan that would blend into traffic, bought with cash from account that didn't exist. Registered to identity that had never been born. Behind them, Sun climbed over rest stop that had witnessed thousands of transient moments, none of them meaning much, all of them part of larger pattern that connected lives in ways invisible until someone looked back with perspective only distance provided. Ahead, 4 cities, multiple targets. Volkov waiting with patience of someone who'd played this game long enough to know how it ended. 30 days to Red October. Maybe less. Clock ticking down toward moment when all debts came due and all ghosts stopped haunting and started taking what they were owed. Jack Morrison settled into passenger seat, let Sarah drive, closed eyes that had seen too much and would see more before this ended. Thought about Catherine, about promises made and broken, about sons who died and fathers who survived and the terrible mathematics of war that never quite balanced. Thought about Hartley somewhere making his own calculations about loyalty and survival and how far a man could fall before the landing killed him. Thought about Morrison and institutions that protected themselves by consuming the people who served them. And thought about Volkov, old enemy, familiar ghost, waiting at end of path that had started in Cold War and would finish in whatever came after empires realized they were mortal. The game wasn't over. Wouldn't be over until someone stopped playing or everyone was dead. Jack Morrison was 62 years old, dying slowly from time and grief and toxic exposure from wars, fought in places whose names civilians couldn't pronounce. But dying slowly wasn't dead. And dead was only time that mattered in end. He opened eyes, watched highway stretch toward horizon. Let's go hunting. The motel existed in that peculiar American space between forgotten and demolished, where rooms rented by the hour and management asked no questions because questions meant police and police meant paperwork. Nobody wanted. Jack had stayed in worse during his career, much worse. But something about this particular slice of decay felt appropriate for men officially designated enemies of the state they'd spent lifetimes defending. Sarah worked the laptop Chen had provided, fingers moving across keys with rhythm that suggested muscle memory from countless intelligence briefings. Screen glow painted her face in shades that made her look older than 28. Lines appearing that would become permanent, given enough years carrying weight that never quite distributed evenly. 4 cities. She pulled up satellite imagery showing defense contractor headquarters in locations that matched Chen's intelligence. Houston, Chicago, San Francisco, Boston. Each one connected to companies that profited from wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Each CEO on Volkov's target list. Jack studied the images from chair that creaked like dying animal. Pattern recognition was skill you either had or developed through decades of threat assessment. Volkov wasn't random, never had been. Every operation he'd run during Cold War showed meticulous planning, patience that measured success in years, not missions. He's been planning this since the Soviet Union fell. Jack's voice carried certainty of someone reading playbook he'd studied for 40 years. Every move since then has been preparation. Getting assets in place, building networks, waiting for a moment when American vulnerability aligned with his capability. Sarah zoomed in on Houston facility. Security looks heavy, private contractors, military-grade equipment. Getting inside requires either badges we don't have or tactics that announce our presence. We don't need inside, Jack pointed at surrounding area. We need to think like Volkov. He's not hitting these places directly. Too obvious, too defendable. He's going to use something that bypasses security entirely. Like what? Jack remembered briefings about 9/11, about how hijackers had used America's infrastructure against itself, turned commercial aircraft into missiles, exploited trust that existed in systems people assumed were safe. Something already there. Something nobody would question until too late. Sarah's fingers stopped moving. You think he's already placed devices? Not devices. People. Volkov's old KGB, he knows that best weapon is the one enemy doesn't recognize as threat. He's got operatives embedded in these facilities. Maintenance workers, security guards, people who've been there years, invisible. If that's true, if they are already inside, how do we stop them without alerting everyone and proving Morrison right about handling this officially? Jack thought about this, about risk and probability and acceptable losses. We don't stop them all. We stop Volkov, remove the head and body dies. Except we don't know where he is. No, but we know someone who does. Sarah looked up from screen, Hartley. Jack nodded. Morrison caught him at the industrial park. Probably arrested him. Maybe worse. Either way, Hartley knows things Morrison doesn't. Details about Volkov's operation he held back as insurance. We get to him, we get location. He's in federal custody by now. Probably black site. Good luck reaching him. We don't need luck. We need leverage. Jack pulled out phone Chen had provided with his dying instructions. And Chen gave us all the leverage we need. The files sat encrypted in cloud storage only 3 people could access. Jack, Sarah, and journalist named Marcus Webb, who'd spent 30 years exposing government corruption at cost of career opportunities and death threats that meant something. Chen had trusted him because Webb's integrity was demonstrated through decades of choosing truth over comfort. Jack composed message carefully, words that would either save thousands or doom mission entirely. Marcus, this is Jack Morrison. Robert Chen gave me your contact for insurance. I'm sending you files that prove systemic corruption in JSOC, including intelligence leaks that got American soldiers killed. If you don't hear from me in 72 hours, publish everything. If federal agents try to stop you, publish everything. If you value the truth, Chen died protecting. Hold these files until the moment they're needed most, then burn down the house of cards. He attached encryption keys and hit send before doubt could interfere with necessity. Sarah watched him. That's scorched earth. Once those files are out, there's no putting them back. Every operation Chen was involved in gets scrutinized. Every classified program gets exposed. It'll take decades for intelligence community to recover. Good. Maybe they'll learn that accountability matters more than the secrecy. Or maybe they'll learn to hide corruption better. Jack's smile held no humor. That's a possibility, but at least we'll have tried. The phone buzzed. Response from Webb came faster than expected. Chen briefed me before he died. Said you'd contact me. Said you were only operator he trusted to use this properly. I'll hold the files. But Morrison, if you're reading this, know that I've got copies in 5 countries with instructions to publish if anything happens to me. The truth comes out regardless. Only question is whether it's controlled burn or wildfire. Sarah closed the laptop. So now we have weapon aimed at everyone, including ourselves. Welcome to nuclear deterrence. Jack stood, joints protesting, body reminding him that 62 wasn't 22 regardless of how his mind felt about the math. Used to be simple. Americans versus Soviets. Good guys versus bad guys. Clear lines. Now the lines are so blurred I can't tell which side I'm on anymore. You're on the side trying to prevent mass casualties. That's the only line that matters. Jack wanted to believe that. Wanted to think motivation erased moral complexity. But 4 decades of service had taught him that good intentions paved roads to places nobody wanted to reach. They moved at 0300 when surveillance was thin and human attention at lowest ebb. Virginia facility where Morrison likely held Heartland sat outside D.C. in complex that didn't officially exist. The kind of place where enhanced interrogation techniques were renamed interview methods and constitutional rights became flexible based on threat assessment. Getting inside would require either official authorization or tactics that crossed lines Jack had spent career defending. The fact that he didn't hesitate choosing the latter option told him how far he'd fallen, or how far he'd always been willing to fall when mission required it. Sarah drove while Jack studied schematics Chen had included in files, blueprints that shouldn't exist, a facility that officially didn't exist. The old man had been thorough, paranoid even, but paranoia was just pattern recognition applied to institutional behavior. And institutions protecting themselves were predictable as gravity. 3 entry points. Sarah's voice cut through darkness. Front gate, loading dock, emergency exit on north side, all monitored, all guarded, all designed to prevent exactly what we're attempting. Then we don't use entry points. Jack traced finger across blueprint. Facility was built over old Cold War bunker system. Underground tunnels connecting to other installations, most sealed after Soviet collapse. But maintenance requires access, and maintenance access means weakness. You want to tunnel in. Sarah's tone suggested this ranked high on list of terrible ideas. We're not exactly equipped for underground infiltration. Don't need equipment, need knowledge. Jack pulled out phones, scrolled through contacts that predated smartphones, names that belonged to era when intelligence work meant relationships, not algorithms. Found one that might still answer at 3 a.m. Tommy Briggs picked up on fourth ring, voice rough with sleep and decades of cigarettes. This better be life or death, because if it's not, I'm hanging up and blocking this number. Tommy, it's Jack Morrison. Silence stretched long enough that Jack thought connection died. Then laughter, wheezing and genuine. Jack Morrison. Heard you were dead. Then heard you were retired. Then heard you went rogue and became domestic terrorist. Figured one of those had to be true. Need a favor. The tunnels under Virginia facility outside D.C. You did maintenance contract there in the 90s. Which access points are still functional? More silence. Tommy thinking through implications of answering, weighing old friendship against current liability. You're really doing this. You're really going after them. They killed my son, used him as bait, and now they're trying to bury the truth because exposure is inconvenient. Tommy's exhale crackled through speaker. Grid reference Delta 7, entrance is hidden under transformer station 2 clicks east of main facility. Access code has probably changed, but physical lock is same one from 96. Standard government procurement. Cheap and predictable. How do I bypass it? Hit it with wrench. That's not joke. Lock's been broken since installation. They just keep painting over damage and pretending it works. Jack smiled despite everything. Government efficiency. Listen, Jack, Tommy's voice dropped. What you're doing, it's going to end badly. Even if you succeed, even if you get what you need, Morrison's not going to let you walk away. People like us, we don't get retirement. We get used up and discarded. I know. Then why do it? Because someone has to. And I'm already dead in every way that matters. Tommy disconnected without goodbye. Old soldiers understood that some conversations didn't need closing pleasantries. The transformer station sat exactly where Tommy described, surrounded by chain link fence and warning signs that threatened death by electrocution in 4 languages. Jack cut through fence with tools from kits Sarah had assembled from hardware stores and improvisation, moved to access panel that probably violated multiple safety regulations. Tommy was right. The lock had been broken so long that paint covered the damage like scar tissue. One solid hit with wrench and it fell open, revealing ladder descending into darknesses that smelled like mildew and decades of government neglect. Sarah went first, rifle slung across back, moving down rungs that creaked protest but held. Jack followed slower, joints complaining about angles that used to be routine, age tacks extracted 1 rung at a time. The tunnel stretched 30 meters of concrete and rust and water seepage that suggested the Cold War infrastructure was losing battle with entropy. Emergency lighting flickered at intervals, pale green glow that made everything look like crime scene photo. They moved in silence, born from training and necessity, sound carried in confined spaces, turned whispers into shouts, footsteps into advertisements of presence. Jack's mind cataloged details automatically. Exit routes, choke points, places where firefight would be suicide, and places where it might be survivable. The tunnel ended at junction with three branches. Jack consulted memory of blueprints, chose center path, moved forward with Sarah covering rear. They emerged into basement level of facility through maintenance access that had been used recently enough that hinges didn't scream when opened. Service corridors stretched in both directions, institutional gray interrupted by pipes and conduit, and the occasional security camera that probably fed directly to monitoring stations staffed by contractors who were paid to watch screens and report anomalies. Jack pointed up at nearest camera. Blind spot in corner. Move there and time rotation to next blind spot. Old technique from era before AI-assisted surveillance, but old technique that still worked because human attention span was design flaw no technology could fix. They moved from shadow to shadow, corner to corner, reaching stairwell that led to detention level without triggering alarms or alerts that would turn infiltration into firefight. The door to detention level required keycard and biometric scan, security upgrade that hadn't existed when blueprints were drawn. Jack examined panel mind, working through problem with methodology that came from decades of bypassing barriers. Can you hack it? Sarah's whisper barely disturbed air. Given time, proper equipment, and divine intervention, maybe. We have none of those. Then what? We wait for someone to open it from inside. Sarah stared at him. That's the plan? Wait and hope? Hope's not plan. It's acknowledgement that sometimes you need fortune to align with skill. They waited in stairwell that smelled like industrial cleaner and fear, positioned where opening door would provide momentary advantage. Minutes stretched toward hour. Jack's knees protested, standing still more than moving. Age was accumulation of small indignities that announced themselves when you needed to remain sharp. The door opened. Guard emerged, young, maybe 30, wearing contractor uniform, an expression of someone who'd pulled over night shift and resented every minute. He saw Jack too late, awareness arriving in same moment as rifle butt that connected with temple and transformed consciousness into absence. They dragged him into stairwell, secured him with zip ties, borrowed his key card, and moved through door before it could lock again. Detention level consisted of 8 cells arranged along corridor that ended at monitoring station currently occupied by single guard who was studying phone instead of screens showing empty hallways. Jack moved with silence that came from hundreds of missions where noise meant death, covered distance to monitoring station before guard registered presence. The guard reached for alarm. Sarah's voice stopped him. Touch it and you die. Don't touch it and you walk away from this. Simple choice. The guard's hand froze, evaluated odds, made smart decision and raised both hands slowly. Where's James Hartley? Cell 6, end of corridor. The guard's voice shook slightly. But you won't get him out. Morrison's got orders to move him in 3 hours. Enhanced interrogation at secondary facility. Enhanced interrogation was euphemism for torture, refined through decades of practice, and classified under national security. Jack felt rage that was becoming familiar. Cold calculation about what institutions did to maintain power. Give me your access codes. The guard complied, reeling off numbers that would open cells and disable alarms. Sarah secured him the same way they'd secured the other guard. Professional efficiency that left him conscious but contained. Cell 6 held James Hartley, looking 20 years older than he had at the industrial park. Bruises colored his face in shades that told story of interrogation that had already begun. He looked up when door opened, eyes focusing slowly, mind probably still sorting through drugs they'd used to facilitate cooperation. Jack, Hartley's voice came out thick. Knew you'd come. Stupid but predictable. Need information about Volkov, where he's staging operations, how he's coordinating attacks. Hartley laughed, wet sound that suggested broken ribs. Why would I tell you? Already lost everything. Career, reputation, freedom. Might as well take secrets to whatever black hole Morrison throws me in. Jack knelt to eye level, because thousands of innocent people are going to die. Because whatever justification you've constructed for your betrayal, you're not murderer of civilians. Not yet. You can stop that. Last chance at redemption before you become exactly what you hate. Redemption. Hartley tested the word like foreign language. That what you think this is about? Saving my soul? No. Saving lives. What happens to your soul is between you and whatever you believe in. Hartley stared at him for a long moment, then spoke with clarity that cut through drug fog. Volkov's in Boston, warehouse district near harbor. Old shipping facility converted to command center. He's been there 3 weeks coordinating through encrypted channels. Everything routes through that location. Why Boston? Because it's Target 7, the final attack. He'll watch from ground zero when it happens. Poetic justice for marathon bombing or some philosophical garbage about chickens coming home to roost. Jack absorbed this. One city, one location. Needle in haystack suddenly visible. What's the target? What's he hitting? Hartley shook his head. That he didn't tell me. Compartmentalized operation. Each cell knows their target. Only Volkov knows full picture. Jack stood. Thank you. Don't thank me. Hartley's eyes held weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. I gave you location. Doesn't erase what I've done. Doesn't bring David back. No. But it might prevent other fathers from losing sons. They left Hartley in cell that would hold him until Morrison arrived, moved back through facility, using same careful timing and blind spots, reached tunnel system without triggering alarms that would turn withdrawal into running battle. Sarah spoke as they climbed ladder towards surface. You believe him? About Boston? Hartley's a traitor, but not a liar. He's got enough conscience left to give us truth when it matters. And if he's wrong, if this is misdirection, then we waste time chasing ghosts while real attacks happen. Jack emerged into pre-dawn darkness that felt like possibility. But that's risk we take. Make decision with information available and live with consequences. They drove toward Boston as sun-painted sky colors that reminded Jack of Catherine's favorite paintings, watercolors she'd done during chemo when hands still worked and mind could focus on beauty instead of dying. He'd burned most of them after she passed because looking at them felt like being slowly flayed. Kept one. Small landscape showing Montana sunrise. It was folded in his wallet now, creased from years of contact, fading like memory. Sarah handled the wheel, letting Jack rest in passenger seat where age tax came due and stiff joints and exhaustion that penetrated bone. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams where David's voice asked questions Jack couldn't answer. Why didn't you save me, Dad? Because I didn't know, didn't see it coming, failed you in ways I'm still discovering. Dreaming, David smiled sadly. You taught me that failure is lesson, not endpoint. So what did you learn? That institutions rot from head down. That good men become bad through accumulation of small compromises. That honor is daily choice, not permanent state. And what are you choosing now? Jack woke before Dream could answer. Boston skyline visible in distance. City that had witnessed centuries of American history, revolution and evolution, and all the complicated violence that came with building nation from principles that sounded better than they practiced. Sarah pulled into parking structure 3 blocks from warehouse district, position that offered escape routes and observation angles. Checked weapons with ritual efficiency. Looked at Jack with expression that mixed determination and doubt. Once we go in, there's no official backup, no support. Morrison's probably tracking us. Federal response will be arrest or eliminate. We're completely alone. Jack loaded magazine into pistol that had served him through more operations than he could count. Been alone most of my career, just usually had better cover story. What's the play? Reconnaissance first or direct action? Jack thought about timeline. About 28 days until Red October, or fewer if Volkov had adjusted schedule. About opportunity cost of caution versus risk of hesitation. We scout location, identify patterns, then we go in hard and fast, old school direct action. Thought you said Volkov was meticulous planner. Wouldn't he have defenses? Absolutely. Jack smiled without humor. Which is why we're not going through defenses. We're going to make him come to us. The warehouse Hartley described sat in district that had seen better days before shipping. Industry moved to larger facilities with deeper water access. Buildings stood like tombstones marking dead economy, broken windows and rust testifying to abandonment. Perfect location for operations that required isolation and lack of civilian witnesses. They observed from distance using binoculars, and patients learned from decades of surveillance work. Buildings showed minimal external security, too minimal for operation this sensitive, which meant security was internal or electronic or both. Sarah counted cameras, 8 visible, probably more hidden. Motion sensors on approaches. Either guards inside are very good or building is empty and we've been fed false intel. Or Volkov knows we're coming and this is trap. Sarah lowered binoculars. Then why are we walking into it? Because sometimes trap is only way to reach prey. Jack's voice carried certainty of someone who'd made similar decisions before and survived through combination of skill and fortune that probably shouldn't be replicated. We go in knowing it's trap. Use that knowledge as advantage. How? Traps are designed around assumptions of how target will behave. We behave differently than expected. That's not plan, that's improvisation. Improvisation is plan that acknowledges reality changes faster than briefings. They waited for darkness, for city lights to paint warehouse district in shadows that moved and concealed. Moved from their observation point at 2200 hours, approaching from direction that cameras didn't cover because whoever placed them assumed threats came from accessible routes, not industrial wasteland that required climbing and crawling and ignoring pain that announced itself with every movement. Jack went first this time, demonstrating that old didn't mean incapable, just meant creative about physics and leverage, reached warehouse wall that had seen decades of weather and neglect, found handholds that shouldn't exist but did because entropy was ally if you knew how to use it. Sarah followed, moving with efficiency that made Jack's struggle look clumsy. Youth was wasted on young who didn't appreciate what they had until age took it away piece by piece. They reached roof access that had been secured with lock that bolt cutters defeated in seconds. Descended into warehouse that smelled like oil and rust and something else. Ozone, maybe. Electrical equipment running constantly. Air conditioning for sensitive electronics. The interior had been converted from storage to command center, with care that suggested significant resources. Computers lined tables that showed real-time feeds from multiple locations. Communications equipment that probably cost more than most American homes. Maps covered walls showing targets and timelines and level of detail that made Jack's chest tighten. This wasn't terrorist cell. This was military operation conducted by professional with resources and planning that rivaled anything JSOC could field. And it was empty. Sarah moved through space, rifle up, clearing corners and checking rooms that branched off main area. Nobody, not even guards. Just equipment humming with electronic life and maps documenting planned mass casualties. It's abandoned. Sarah's voice carried confusion. Recently, coffee's still warm. Someone was here less than an hour ago. Jack studied maps, studied timelines, studied pattern that suddenly became clear with terrible certainty. He knew we were coming, knew exactly when. This isn't trap for us. This is distraction. From what? Jack pointed at map showing Boston, at location marked with red X. At date that had been moved up. From attack happening right now. The location was hospital. Massachusetts General, one of largest medical centers in Boston. Thousands of patients, staff, visitors. Target that would maximize casualties and psychological impact because hospitals were supposed to be safe. Sanctuaries from violence. Places where healing happened, not dying. Sarah pulled out phone. We need to warn them. Evacuate, lock down. And prove Morrison was right about handling this officially. Jack's mind raced through options that all ended badly. Time to evacuate thousands is hours we don't have. Time to explain the situation to authorities who think we're terrorists is time attack succeeds while we're being detained. Then what do? We find the operative. We stop the attack directly. One operative in hospital of thousands? That's impossible. Impossible is just difficult with better marketing. Jack headed for door. Volkov's old KGB. He thinks in patterns. Operatives placed in positions of access and trust. Someone who's been there long enough to be invisible. Maintenance worker. Security guard. Someone with keys to areas civilians don't reach. Sarah kept pace. That's still dozens of possible targets. Then we narrow it down. Jack's phone buzzed. Message from number he didn't recognize. Opened it and found single photo. Volkov's face, unmistakable. Standing in hospital corridor wearing maintenance uniform, an expression that suggested he knew exactly who would see this image. Below the photo, message in English typed with precision that matched everything about the man. Jack, old friend, you're close but not close enough. By the time you find me, by the time you understand what I've planned, it will be too late. Massachusetts General sits above infrastructure you've forgotten exists. Tunnels from Prohibition era, steam pipes, electrical conduits, and explosives placed carefully over 3 months by maintenance worker who earned trust through competence and punctuality. Building comes down in 90 minutes. Thousands die, and you watch knowing you almost stopped it. Come find me if you dare. Last game between old warriors. May the better ghost win. Sarah read over his shoulder. He's giving us location. Why? Because he wants me there when it happens. Wants me to fail in front of him. Psychological victory matters more than just winning. Jack studied photo background, recognized corridor from hospital floor plan he'd memorized during medical visits with Catherine. Basement level, near mechanical systems. He's near the boilers, where infrastructure connects to older tunnel systems, where explosives would do maximum structural damage. They move fast, Sarah driving with urgency that ignored traffic laws and assumed police had better things to do than chase speeding sedan. Reached Massachusetts General 22 minutes after receiving Volkov's message. 68 minutes until detonation if timer was accurate. Main entrance was chaos. Normal hospital chaos multiplied by shift change and emergency admissions and all the human suffering that concentrated in places designed to ease it. Security present but focused on visible threats, not maintenance workers who'd earned trust over months. Jack and Sarah bypassed main entrance, moving to service entrance that Tommy Briggs had mentioned once during conversation about hospital infrastructure. Access required keycard they didn't have, but door that didn't quite latch properly because maintenance had been deferred and budgets allocated elsewhere. Inside, institutional corridors stretched in directions marked by signs that made sense to staff and confused everyone else. Jack, oriented by memory and instinct, heading down toward basement levels where mechanical systems lived and civilians rarely ventured. The elevator was too visible, too monitored. They took stairs, descending into hospital underbelly where paint peeled and lighting flickered and machinery hummed with constant effort of keeping building functional. Basement level 2, basement level 3. Corridors getting narrower, older, showing bones of structure that dated back century or more. Jack's sense of time compressed. 68 minutes becoming abstract concept when every second carried weight of potential casualties. Sarah moved ahead, clearing corners, weapon ready, stopped at intersection where corridor branched 3 ways. Which direction? Jack listened, heard machinery, heard pipes, heard something else. Breathing, deliberate, controlled, coming from passage to the right. That way. They moved single file, Jack leading now, weapon up, finger on trigger but not committed. Shooting in hospital basement near fuel lines and electrical systems was invitation to disaster that made original threat pale by comparison. The corridor opened into room that housed boilers and electrical panels and infrastructure that kept hospital functioning. And standing among the machinery, looking exactly like photo but older, more weathered, more tired, Vladimir Volkov waited with expression of someone who'd been expecting them. Jack Morrison. Volkov's English carried accent softened by decades. Punctual as always. KGB training, or is that natural compulsion? Where are the explosives? Everywhere. Volkov gestured at machinery surrounding them, hidden in maintenance panels, attached to support columns, placed over months while I perfected the art of being invisible. Detonator is on timer, 56 minutes until this building becomes tomb for thousands. Jack's weapon stayed level. Disable it. No. Volkov's smile was sad rather than cruel. This is lesson America needs. Demonstration that exporting violence leads to imported consequences. Every bombing victim in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, they're coming home to roost in hospital where Americans seek healing. Sarah's voice cut in. These people are innocent. They didn't order bombings. Volkov turned to her. Same argument victims make in countries you've destroyed. Innocence is luxury of powerful. Powerless don't get such distinctions. Jack saw it then. The totality of Volkov's plan. Not just physical destruction, but moral destruction. Proof that America was no different than terrorists it claimed to fight. That violence begat violence in cycles that continued until everyone was destroyed or everyone learned. You've been planning this since Berlin. Jack's understanding crystallized. Every operation, every move, all leading to this moment. Since before Berlin, since Afghanistan, when Soviets learned what Americans are learning now. Empire is expensive. Revenge is patient. Justice is illusion powerful, tell themselves while crushing weak. Then why tell me? Why give me chance to stop this? Volkov's expression shifted because you understand cost. You've paid it your entire life. Lost friends, lost innocence, lost son. You know truth powers won't admit that wars are rackets and soldiers are commodities and everything we fought for was lie wrapped in flags. Jack felt words land with accuracy that suggested Volkov had studied him as carefully as battle plans. Maybe you're right, maybe it was all lies, but that doesn't make mass murder justice. Doesn't make it wrong either. Volkov pulled device from pocket. Dead man switch. If I release it or my heart stops, building detonates immediately. If timer runs out, same result. Only way to stop it is if I choose to stop it. And what would make you choose? Volkov smiled. That's the question, yes? What would make old warrior change his mind about lifetime of planning? What argument could possibly outweigh decades of grievance? Jack lowered his weapon slowly. Deliberate gesture of trust or surrender. Tell me about your daughter. Volkov's expression froze. That is not your business. You mentioned her in Syria. On tape David recorded. Said she moved to America. Changed her name. Won't speak to you. So you're doing this to hurt America, but really you're trying to hurt her. Prove she was wrong to choose us over you. Make her regret leaving. Force her to see that her father was right about American corruption. Volkov's hand tightened on switch. You know nothing about my daughter. I know losing child is worse than dying. I know you look at America and see the thing that stole her. Know you want her to acknowledge that you were right, she was wrong, and the only way to get that acknowledgement is through violence, because communication failed years ago. That's psychology. Volkov's voice carried edge. Reductive American psychology that explains nothing. It's truth. Jack moved closer, slowly watching Volkov's hand on switch. David joined military because I did. Spent his life trying to earn approval I gave freely, but he couldn't accept. Died because I taught him that service mattered more than safety. And now I'm hunting down everyone responsible, including myself, because grief needs target and revenge feels like purpose. What's your point? Point is, we're the same. Old men who lost everything that mattered. Difference is, I'm not going to kill innocents to ease pain. Not going to make other fathers lose children because I lost mine. Volkov's laugh was bitter. Difference is you have luxury of choice. I'm already monster in her eyes. Might as well earn the title. Sarah's voice joined. Sir, if I may. Volkov glanced at her, the young soldier, David Morrison's protege, his chosen successor. Does she know what he was really like? I know he saved my life. Sarah's voice stayed level. Took shrapnel meant for me. Spent weeks recovering and never complained. Talked about his father constantly. How Jack taught him honor meant more than victory. Volkov studied her. And where did that honor lead? To Syrian compound. To ambush? To death alone while Handler betrayed him. It led to me standing here trying to stop you. Sarah lowered her weapon, matching Jack's gesture. Led to me choosing to do right thing even when it's hard. That's what David taught me. That's his legacy. You detonate those explosives, you don't destroy America. You destroy his lesson. Make his death meaningless. Lessons don't matter. Volkov's voice wavered slightly. Only outcomes matter. History judges results, not intentions. Jack took another step. When Catherine died, when cancer took her piece by piece while I watched helpless, I wanted to burn the world down. Rage at God, medicine, time itself, wanted everyone to feel fraction of pain I felt. David stopped me, sat with me in hospital parking lot, and said that Mom wouldn't want her death to poison me, wouldn't want her memory attached to bitterness. He was young, naive. He was wise. Jack's voice broke slightly. Wiser than me. Understood that cycles end when someone chooses to break them. You detonate those charges, you continue cycle. Your daughter never speaks to you again because now you're not just ideological opponent, you're mass murderer. But you stop, you save thousands. Maybe conversation becomes possible. Maybe redemption exists. Volkov stood silent, hand on switch, 50 minutes on timer visible on device at his feet, boilers humming around them. Hospital above continuing its work of healing, unaware that death waited below. When he spoke, his voice carried weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. You killed my career, my reputation, everything I built in KGB, and when I tried to rebuild, your government hunted me, made me ghost, made me enemy, cost me family. I know, and I'm sorry, Jack meant it. We were soldiers following orders that looked righteous from one side, evil from the other. We did terrible things in name of causes we believed in. But we're old now, almost done. Last chance to choose who we were versus who we'll be remembered as. What do you want from me, Jack Morrison? Forgiveness? I cannot give that. Understanding? You already have it. I want you to stop. Not for me, Not for America, for your daughter. For chance that maybe someday she'll hear you save thousands and wonder if her father had good in him she couldn't see. Timer showed 48 minutes. Volkov looked at dead man's switch in his hand, at device by his feet, at Jack and Sarah standing in basement that could become tomb or become another day in hospital that saved lives. His hand opened. Switch fell. Jack lunged, caught it before impact, held it depressed while Sarah moved to Volkov, securing him with speed that came from training. The device by Volkov's feet required codes only he knew. Demanded them through pain compliance techniques Sarah applied with professional efficiency that suggested mercy was luxury neither side could afford. Volkov gave codes that disarmed timer with 11 minutes remaining. Jack released dead man switch once confirmation showed system disarmed. Step back. Let exhaustion that had been accumulating catch up. 62 years old and fighting terrorists in hospital basements felt like cosmic jokes someone forgot to make funny. Volkov sat against boiler, hands secured, bleeding from where Sarah had been persuasive. Looked at Jack with expression mixing defeat and something approaching respect. You were always worthy opponent, best I ever faced, but this changes nothing. More will come, cycle continues. America will reap what it sowed. Maybe. Jack knelt to eye level, joints screaming protest. Or maybe next generation breaks cycle. Maybe people like Sarah learn from our mistakes and choose different path. You believe that? After everything? Have to. Jack stood with difficulty. Otherwise, what was point? What did Catherine die believing in? What did David sacrifice for? Hope is delusion, powerful used to control weak. Or maybe it's the only weapon that actually works. Police arrived 8 minutes later. FBI 3 minutes after that. Morrison's tactical team 90 seconds behind them. Warehouse full of armed people with competing jurisdictions and unclear authority, while EOD worked frantically to clear explosives that Volkov had placed with patience measured in months. Morrison pushed through crowd, face red with fury that transcended professional disagreement and became personal vendetta. Morrison, you're under arrest. Both of you, domestic terrorism, unauthorized operations. About 50 other charges my lawyers are drafting as we speak. Jack faced her without flinching. We just prevented mass casualty event. Your official channels would have been paperworking while thousands died. You're welcome. You had no authority. You compromised classified operations. You threatened national security with rogue actions. I saved lives. Jack's voice carried exhaustion that was becoming permanent. Do what you want with me, but check the explosives, verify Volkov's network, confirm everything I've told you. Then decide if you want history recording that you arrested the men who stopped Red October while you were maintaining institutional credibility. Morrison's jaw worked. Calculations happening behind eyes that had sent people to die for lesser considerations. She gestured to tactical team. Secure them. No one talks to them without my authorization. Transport to secure facility for debriefing that will last until I'm satisfied. Jack and Sarah were separated, cuffed, loaded into vehicles that smelled like military transport and broken promises. Jack caught Sarah's eyes briefly, saw determination that reminded him why David had chosen her as protege. She'd continue fighting regardless of cost. That was enough. Had to be enough. The cell they placed him in was clean and secure and indistinguishable from dozen others he'd occupied during career. Jack sat on bunk that was harder than it looked and thought about Catherine, about David, about Volkov waiting in similar cell, probably thinking similar thoughts about daughter he'd lost to ideology and pride. Morning came with weak sunlight through window designed to prevent escape. Guard brought breakfast that was adequate and coffee that was terrible. Jack ate mechanically, fuel for body that needed less food than mission required. Morrison arrived at 0900, alone, which meant this conversation was off record or personal or both. She sat across from him in an interview room that probably had cameras, but maybe didn't. Volkov gave complete intelligence on network. 7 cities, 30 operatives embedded over 5 years. Infrastructure plans, communications protocols, everything. Morrison's voice was level. You were right. We'd have been coordinating response through official channels while attacks happened. You saved thousands. Jack waited. There was more. Had to be more. But you did it through methods that can't be officially acknowledged. Through actions that violated every protocol and several laws. Through tactics that demonstrate systemic problems with accountability and special operations. So you're covering it up. Jack understood perfectly. Making it classified. Burying it under national security. I'm containing it. Morrison's correction was precise. Difference matters. Coverage implies hiding truth. Containment means managing truth for optimal outcome. Semantics. Reality. Morrison leaned forward. Here's situation. Volkov goes to black site where enhanced interrogation extracts every detail about Russian intelligence networks that placed him. Information saves lives, prevents future attacks. Value is undeniable. What about Hartley? Hartley faces court-martial, closed proceedings, guilty verdict, life sentence. Justice served quietly without public spectacle that damages institutional credibility. And me? Morrison's pause suggested she was still deciding. Your problem. War hero who went rogue. Stop terrorist attack through unauthorized means. Can't prosecute you without revealing things that need to stay buried. Can't release you without setting precedent that operators can freelance. So I disappear. Black site, enhanced interrogation under different name. No. Morrison's answer surprised him. You retire. Again. Officially. With full benefits and notation that your classified service concluded successfully. You return to Montana. Keep your mouth shut. Die quietly in a decade or so from old age or whatever kills old soldiers when war doesn't. What about truth? What about accountability? Truth is whatever serves nation best. Accountability is luxurious ideal that gets people killed. Morrison stood. You're free to go, Morrison. Your vehicle is being returned. Your weapons are confiscated. Your security clearances are permanently revoked. If you ever speak publicly about any of this, you'll be prosecuted under Espionage Act and spend the rest of your life in Supermax. And Sarah? Castellano stays active duty, receives commendation for classified operation, continues serving with distinction because she's valuable asset who followed illegal orders from superior who should have known better. Jack absorbed this. The narrative that would become official record. Sarah blameless. Jack rogue operator. Hartley traitor. Morrison problem solver. Truth twisted into shape that protected institution while disposing of inconvenient witnesses. Chen would have hated this. Chen's dead. Morrison's voice softened fractionally. Heart attack in hospital while under guard. Final message was to you. Guard copied it before deleting from official logs. She handed Jack folded paper. Chen's handwriting, shaky but legible. Jack, if you're reading this, you survived. Good. World needs people willing to fight even when system is rigged. I spent 40 years trying to reform from inside and learned that institutions consume reformers first. You chose different path, outside, beyond rules. Maybe that's only way change happens. Catherine would understand. David too. Make your last years count. Not through violence, but through example. Show them that honor survives even when everything else rots. Your friend, Chen. Jack folded paper carefully, placed it in wallet next to Catherine's faded painting and David's photo. Collection of ghosts that traveled with him. Morrison walked him to exit where Sarah waited, also free, also warned, also carrying weight of things that couldn't be spoken about without consequences. They drove in silence toward Montana. Let the miles accumulate like time. Let America scroll past in all its complicated glory. Strip malls and farmland and small towns that existed between forgotten and demolished. Sarah spoke after 4 hours. Was it worth it? Everything we did, everything we lost. Jack thought about this, about truth buried and justice delayed in institutions that protected themselves while consuming servants. About thousands of people in hospital who lived because 2 operators went rogue. Ask me in decade. Jack's voice was tired. Right now, I'm too close to see clearly, but those people in hospital, they get to go home, see their families, live their lives. That has to count for something. Sarah nodded. David would say it counts for everything. Maybe. Jack watched horizon where Montana waited with quiet mornings and Catherine's grave and ghosts that would never quite leave. Or maybe David would say that honor isn't about results. It's about trying when trying costs everything and no one's watching and history won't remember. History remembers eventually. Sarah's certainty reminded him why young people mattered. Even buried truths get uncovered. Even classified files get declassified. Someday people will know what happened, what you did, what we all did. By then we'll be dead and judgment won't matter. Maybe judgment was never the point. Maybe the point was choosing right thing even when wrong thing was easier. Jack smiled despite exhaustion. You sound like Catherine. She used to say exactly that. Sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. And she'd like you, would have invited you to dinner, asked about your family, made you feel like you mattered. I wish I'd met her. Me too. Montana appeared finally. Familiar roads, familiar landscapes, home in a way that transcended geography and became emotional anchor in world that kept trying to drown you. Jack thanked Sarah for the ride, watched her drive away toward career that would probably eat her alive, but maybe not. Maybe she'd survive with soul intact. Maybe David's lessons would protect her where Jack's had failed him. The ranch looked exactly as he'd left it weeks ago, though it felt like years. Horses needed feeding. Catherine's grave needed visiting. Whiskey waited in kitchen that smelled like absence. Jack stood on porch watching sunset paint sky colors that reminded him of everyone he'd lost. Catherine, David, Chen, even Volkov in some strange way. All of them ghosts now, all of them part of the weight he carried. But the weight felt different somehow. Still heavy, always heavy, but purposeful, like armor instead of burden, like he'd chosen to carry it instead of having it forced upon him. Tomorrow he'd feed horses, visit Catherine, tell her about everything that happened and everything he'd learned. Tell her that honor was still possible, even in corrupt systems, that choosing right thing mattered even when no one acknowledged it. Tell her that he missed her, that he'd see her soon, that he was tired, so tired, but not done yet, not quite done yet. 3 weeks after Boston, Jack Morrison stood in his barn at dawn watching horses breathe fog into Montana air that smelled like frost and hay and the particular silence that comes before snow. His hands, scarred from decades of work that had nothing to do with ranching, moved through the routine of feeding with muscle memory that belonged to this quieter life he'd tried to build after Catherine died. But quiet was illusion, always had been. The phone in his jacket pocket had been buzzing intermittently for 2 days. Same unknown number, same pattern. 3 rings, disconnect, wait 5 minutes, repeat. Old signal from era when communication meant more than algorithms and everyone who mattered, new codes that transcended technology. Jack let it ring, ignored the pull toward whatever waited on the other end. He'd earned peace, however temporary, however illusory, earned the right to feed horses and visit Catherine's grave and drink coffee on the porch while sunrise painted mountains colors that reminded him why living mattered even when dying felt easier. The phone buzzed again. Jack pulled it out, stared at screen showing number that finally included message. Hartley escaped. Morrison needs you, Webb. Marcus Webb, Chen's journalist friend. The one holding files that could burn down intelligence infrastructure if released. Jack had met him once, years ago. Found him to be exactly what Chen described. Incorruptible. Dangerously honest. The kind of man who chose truth over comfort and paid for it in ways that showed in lines around his eyes. Jack called the number. Webb answered on first ring. Hartley walked out of military detention 3 days ago. Inside help. Someone in Morrison's command structure facilitated escape. She's keeping it quiet, trying to contain it. But I've got sources who confirmed it. Where is he? Unknown. But Morrison thinks he's going after Volkov. Revenge or completion of mission or both. She wants you to find him before he does something that makes Boston look contained. I'm retired. Again. Officially this time. Webb's laugh held no humor. Morrison's exact words were, "Tell Jack Morrison that retirement is fiction. I sold him to keep him quiet. Reality is I need him one more time. Find Hartley, stop whatever he's planning, then we're done." What if I refuse? Then she activates Kill Team, and Hartley dies along with whoever gets caught in crossfire. Your choice. Clean or messy. But it happens with or without you. Jack looked at mountains that didn't care about human violence, at horses that had no concept of duty or honor, or the weight of decisions that destroyed men from inside out. Where does Morrison want me? DC. She'll brief you personally. Webb paused. Jack, Chen trusted you to do right thing even when right thing was complicated. Don't let his death be for nothing. The line went dead before Jack could respond. He stood holding phone that felt heavier than it should, staring at ranch that represented every choice he'd made since Catherine died. Stay here and let violence happen elsewhere, or return to world that consumed everyone who served it. Catherine's voice in memory, soft and certain. You can't save everyone, Jack, but you have to try to save someone. Otherwise, what's the point? He packed in 20 minutes. Essentials only. Went to the study where David's photos watched with frozen youth that would never age, never change, never know how story ended. touched the frame holding his son's last smile. I'm gonna finish this. Really finish it this time. Then I'm done. Promise. The promise felt hollow even saying it. Promises to the dead always did. Sarah met him at Dulles Airport looking like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Probably hadn't. Her eyes held exhaustion mixed with determination that suggested she'd been working continuously since Boston, probably trying to understand how system failed so completely that Trader could walk free from military detention. She drove him toward Pentagon in sedan that smelled like coffee and stress, while DC traffic demonstrated that no amount of military power could organize civilian movement efficiently. Morrison refused to explain over phone, said she needs you to see something, understand full scope before you make decision. What decision? I'm already here. Whether to help her or help me. Sarah's voice carried weight that suggested this wasn't simple briefing. Morrison wants Hartley dead quietly. I want him alive and talking. Difference matters. Why? Because dead men don't testify. Dead men don't expose networks. Morrison wants containment. I want truth. Chen died trying to get truth out. Not going to let that be wasted on convenient fiction. Jack studied her profile, saw David in the set of her jaw, the absolute certainty that right thing existed and could be chosen despite consequences. You know, truth gets people killed. You've seen it, lived it. Why keep fighting for something that costs everything and changes nothing? Because someone has to. Sarah's hands tightened on wheel. And because David believed it mattered. If I stop believing that, then he died for nothing, and I've wasted years learning lessons that don't apply. They drove in silence after that. Let the weight of dead idealists settle between them like third passenger. Nobody acknowledged, but everyone felt. Morrison waited in conference room deep inside Pentagon, surrounded by security that suggested paranoia or necessity depending on how optimistic you felt about institutional loyalty. She looked older than Boston, grayer, carrying exhaustion that came from fighting battles on multiple fronts, where victory was measured in contained disasters rather than actual success. Hartley escaped with help from someone in my command structure. Morrison didn't waste time on pleasantries. Someone with access to detention schedules, transport protocols, security codes. Someone who knew exactly when and how to facilitate his release without triggering alarms until he was hours gone. Inside job. Jack sat in a chair that was more comfortable than it looked. Same thing Hartley did for Volkov. Pattern repeating. Exactly. Morrison pulled up display showing surveillance footage from detention facility. 3 guards, all veterans, all with decorated service records, all disappeared same night Hartley walked. Found dead 2 days later in warehouse outside Baltimore. Executed. Professional. Single shots to back of head. Hartley killed them? No. Morrison's answer came with certainty. Ballistics match Russian weapons. Technique matches FSB training. Volkov's network isn't dead. It adapted, and now they have Hartley. Why? What do they gain? Morrison pulled up new image. Volkov in prison transfer, heavily guarded, heading towards Supermax where enhanced interrogation would extract every secret he'd accumulated over 40 years of intelligence work. They're going to break him out. Use Hartley to facilitate exactly what Hartley did for him before. Inside knowledge of American security protocols. Access codes, timing windows, everything needed to spring the most valuable intelligence asset Russia has in American custody. When, within 72 hours, transfer happens tomorrow. Route is classified, but Hartley knows our procedures. He'll predict route, identify vulnerability, execute extraction. Then Volkov disappears back into shadows, and we've lost our best source of intelligence about Russian operations in the West. Sarah leaned forward. So we ambush the ambush, set trap using their own plan against them. Morrison shook her head. Won't work. They'll expect that. Hartley knows how I think, knows how we plan. Anticipation is his advantage. Jack had been silent, processing patterns and probabilities with methodology honed over decades. Spoke finally with voice that carried weight of uncomfortable truth. You're not telling us everything. There's more to this than Volkov extraction. Morrison's pause confirmed it. Intelligence indicates the breakout is cover for something larger. While our resources are focused on preventing Volkov's escape, Hartley's going to hit secondary target, something that causes maximum damage while we're looking wrong direction. What target? Arlington. Morrison's voice dropped. National Cemetery. During funeral for Senator Bradley, who died last week. Services tomorrow. Thousands attending, including most of congressional leadership. Joint Chiefs, foreign dignitaries, symbol of American military sacrifice. Hartley's going to bomb it. Sarah's understanding was immediate. Prove that even our sacred ground isn't safe, that honoring dead is vulnerable, not bomb. Morrison pulled up schematics showing cemetery layout with detail that suggested months of planning. Sarin gas, released from underground maintenance tunnels during ceremony. Wind patterns at time of service will spread it across entire gathering. Casualties estimated at 3 to 5,000, depending on concentration and response time. Jack felt cold settle in chest that had nothing to do with temperature. That's not terrorism. That's warfare. Chemical weapons on American soil targeting leadership. It's message. Morrison's voice was flat. Message that American power is theater, that symbols can be destroyed, that nothing is sacred when payback comes due. Where's the gas? How is it being delivered? That's what we don't know. Intelligence indicates components were acquired over 6 months through shell companies. Assembly location is unknown. Delivery method is unknown. We have theory based on Hartley's expertise, but no confirmation. You want me to find him? Jack understood the assignment. Not apprehend, not arrest. Find and eliminate before he can execute whatever he's planned. I want you to stop him. Morrison's careful word choice carried legal weight. Whatever that requires. With understanding that official record will show I knew nothing about your actions. That you acted independently as concerned citizen with specialized skills. Deniable operation. Jack had run dozens. Knew the contours intimately. If I succeed, you take credit through official channels. If I fail or get caught, I'm rogue operative who violated terms of retirement. That's the deal. Morrison met his eyes without flinching. I'm not pretending it's fair. I'm not pretending you don't deserve better. But time is running out and your best option available. Sarah stood abruptly. This is exactly what Chen fought against. Extrajudicial operations. No accountability. Using people until they're broken, then discarding them. Morrison's expression hardened. Chen's dead. His ideals died with him. I'm dealing with reality where thousands of people die tomorrow unless someone stops Hartley, and that someone can't be official because official channels are compromised. How many times, Sarah's voice rose, how many times do we excuse institutional rot by saying emergency requires exception? At what point does exception become rule? When the alternative is mass casualties. Morrison stood, matching her intensity. I understand your anger. I share it. But anger doesn't save lives. Action does. Imperfect action by flawed people using questionable methods that somehow prevent worst outcomes. Jack's voice cut through tension. Hartley's got resources, safe houses, contacts, money. How do I find him in 72 hours when your entire apparatus can't? Because you know him. Morrison sat back down. You served together, saved his life. Know how he thinks. Pattern recognition that computers can't match. You find him through understanding, not surveillance. And if I find him, if I stop this, what happens to Hartley? That depends. Morrison's honesty was almost refreshing. If he surrenders, if he provides intelligence about remaining network, he lives. Goes to Supermax but lives. If he resists, if he forces confrontation, then you do what needs doing and live with it same way you've lived with every other impossible choice. Jack thought about Somalia, about Beirut, about decades of impossible choices that accumulated into weight that crushed men slowly. Thought about Catherine telling him that some weights were worth carrying because alternative was abandoning what made you human. I'll find him, but Sarah comes with me, non-negotiable. Morrison looked between them, seeing calculation play out, finally nodded, approved, but understand that if this goes wrong, if either of you compromises operation, you're both expendable. We've always been expendable. Jack stood with difficulty that announced his age. Difference is now we know it. They left Pentagon with files that detailed everything intelligence knew about Hartley's network, which was simultaneously comprehensive and insufficient. Hundreds of pages documenting contacts, finances, movements, but nothing that pointed toward location or timing or the critical details that separated data from actionable intelligence. Sarah drove toward safe house Morrison had arranged, anonymous apartment in Arlington that probably housed dozens of operations and knew more secrets than walls should contain. You believe her? About only caring about stopping attack? Jack watched DC scroll past, monuments and power concentrated in city that exported violence, and called it foreign policy. Doesn't matter what I believe. Matters what's true. Hartley's planning mass casualty event. That's true regardless of Morrison's motivations. We stop him or we don't. Everything else is noise. How do we find him? We think like him. Jack pulled out files, started reading. Hartley's old school, trained an era before digital surveillance. He'll avoid cameras, electronic transactions, anything that leaves trail. But he still needs resources, still needs to move materials, still needs to coordinate with what remains of Volkov's network. Sarah parked outside Safe House. So we find the resources, track materials. We find the why. Jack gathered files. Hartley's not random. Everything he does has logic. Bombing Arlington during military funeral isn't just tactical. It's personal. Means something to him beyond body count. The Safe House smelled like every temporary quarters Jack had occupied over 40 years. Neutral, sterile, designed for function, not comfort. He spread files across table that had probably hosted countless operations planning, started seeing patterns that computers missed because computers didn't understand how broken men thought. Hartley served 18 years before Somalia. Sarah read through service record, decorated, respected, recommended for advancement repeatedly. Then Somalia happened. Jack found the pivot point. After that, recommendations stopped. Performance reviews included phrases like, concerning behavior and requires counseling. He was being managed out, pushed toward retirement, nobody wanted, but everyone was relieved to have. Because of what happened there? Because of what he did there. Jack found classified file Chen had included. Not official report, but witness statements from other operators who'd been present during operation where Hartley executed 3 prisoners, was investigated, cleared due to combat circumstances, and witness testimonies that supported his version of events. But something changed. Trust was broken, even if rules said he'd followed them. Sarah studied photo of young Hartley, pre-Somalia, smiling in uniform that fits someone who believed in what it represented. What breaks a man like that? Jack thought about his own breaking, about Catherine dying by inches, about David's death, about learning that institutions you bled for would consume you without hesitation if expedient. Disillusionment comes slow usually, accumulation of small betrayals, system using you, discarding the others, realizing everything you believed was story told by people who profited from your service. Most people absorb it, become cynical, retire quietly. Few become Hartley. What's the difference between cynicism and violence? Jack met her eyes. Cynics still believe system could work if fixed. Violence comes when you believe system is irredeemable. That only way to change it is to destroy it. Do you believe that? Jack thought about this honestly. Some days. Then I remember Catherine saying that systems are made of people. People can change. Slowly. Imperfectly. But change is possible if someone keeps fighting for it. Did she believe that until the end? Until the end and beyond. Jack's voice carried weight of memory. Even when cancer was winning. Even when she knew I'd keep fighting wars that would probably kill me, she believed that fighting for right thing mattered more than winning. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. David said same thing, that his mom was wisest person he'd ever known. She was. And she'd tell us right now that finding Hartley matters not because Morrison ordered it, but because thousands of people will die if we don't. They worked through files until exhaustion became liability. Sarah took first watch while Jack tried to sleep in bedroom that felt like every temporary quarters he'd occupied. Sleep came in fragments interrupted by dreams where Catherine and David and Hartley all spoke simultaneously about honor and betrayal and the price of choosing sides. Woke at 0400 with clarity that came from unconscious processing of patterns his conscious mind had missed. Arlington Cemetery. Service tomorrow. Hartley wouldn't use tunnels. Too obvious. Too easily secured. He'd use something already there. Something that belonged. Something nobody would question. He called Sarah to room where maps of Arlington covered table. Here. Jack pointed at maintenance area. Underground utilities. Steam pipes for heating historic buildings. Water lines. Electrical conduits. Infrastructure that predates security upgrades. Hartley knows these systems. Probably accessed them during his own service. Funerals he attended, ceremonies he participated in. Sarah traced routes. If gas is released from underground utilities, spreads through maintenance tunnels before emerging at strategic points during ceremony. Wind patterns from the west. Jack checked weather forecast Morrison had included. Gas releases at western edge spreads east across gathering. Maximum casualties, minimum warning time. We need to check every access point. Sarah started counting. 27 maintenance entrances across cemetery grounds. Can't secure them all without alerting Hartley and causing him to adjust plan. Don't need to secure them all. Jack's mind worked through tactical problem. Just need to find which one he's using. Which one gives best coverage with minimal exposure? That's still a dozen possibilities. Then we narrow it down. Think like Hartley. He's methodical, prepared, been planning this for months maybe. Which access point did he choose and why? The next 12 hours were investigation by elimination. Checking maintenance records Morrison had provided through channels that probably violated several laws. Finding pattern in access times. Seeing which tunnels had been entered by contractors who didn't quite match employment records. Following thread through bureaucracy that had grown so complex, it created opportunities for people who knew how to exploit gaps. Sarah found it at 1600 hours. Contractor named James Harris, who'd performed maintenance at Arlington for 6 months. Background checks showed employment at legitimate company, but deeper dig revealed company was Shell Corporation established year ago. Personnel records were fabricated. James Harris was ghost, who existed only in paperwork. And James Harris had accessed utility tunnel beneath Section 7, western edge of cemetery, 3 times in past month. Always during night shifts, always alone, always with equipment that maintenance logs didn't quite explain. That's him. Jack studied maps showing Section 7 layout. Perfect position for gas release. Wind carries it east. Covers entire ceremony area. Maximum effect. We go tonight. Sarah checked weapons. Secure tunnel before he can deliver gas. Jack shook his head. He won't deliver until tomorrow. Day of ceremony. Wants to ensure timing is perfect. But he'll pre-position tonight. Stage equipment. Run final checks. That's when we take him. And if he doesn't show, then we wait in tunnel tomorrow and stop him during execution. But he'll show tonight. Can't risk something going wrong day of. Too many variables. Has to verify everything works. They positioned at 2200 hours in location that offered view of tunnel entrance Hartley had been accessing. Temperature had dropped, frost forming on grass that held decades of honored dead. Jack's breath fogged in air that smelled like earth and memory. Sarah maintained watch through night vision scope while Jack monitored electronic sensors Morrison had provided. Waiting was skill. Patience was weapon. They'd both learned this over careers spent in places where rushing meant dying. At 01:15, movement. Single figure approaching from direction that avoided security cameras. Moving with purpose and familiarity. Carrying equipment case that was larger than maintenance should require. That's him. Sarah's voice barely whispered through comm. Jack watched through his own scope as Hartley reached tunnel entrance. Used key to access lock that should have been changed months ago, but probably wasn't, because bureaucracy moves slower than threat. We move on my mark. Give him time to descend. Trap him underground where he can't run. They waited 3 minutes, then moved with coordination that came from training and shared understanding of tactics that transcended words. Reached tunnel entrance. Descended ladder that was older than both of them combined. Entered darkness that smelled like decay and chemicals that shouldn't be stored in historic cemetery. Lights ahead. Hartley working by flashlight, setting up equipment that Jack recognized immediately. Gas dispersal system, military grade, lethal concentration. Enough to kill everyone within 200 meters of release point. Jack moved into light slowly. Weapon ready but not aimed. Voice calm. James. Hartley spun. Hand went to sidearm. Stopped when he saw Jack and Sarah both had him covered. Jack, of course it's you. Hartley's laugh was bitter. Morrison sends her best when she needs something cleaned up quietly. I'm not here for Morrison. I'm here because thousands of people are going to die if you do this. Thousands die every day because of what we built. Hartley gestured at equipment. What's few thousand more when we've killed millions across decades of wars nobody can justify? These aren't enemy combatants. These are civilians, families, people who had nothing to do with decisions you were angry about. Everyone's complicit. Hartley's eyes held certainty of someone who'd crossed line and couldn't see it anymore. Every taxpayer funds these wars. Every voter elects these criminals. Every soldier who follows orders enables the machine. Arlington is full of people who died believing they fought for something noble. I'm just showing truth. They died for profit, for empire, For lies. Maybe. Jack lowered his weapon slightly. Maybe you're right about all of it, but this won't fix anything. Won't change policy. Won't prevent future wars. Just adds more bodies to count we're already carrying. Good. Hartley's hand moved toward detonator. Let America count bodies for once. Let politicians bury children like I buried my career. Like you buried your son. Let them feel fraction of pain we've felt. David wouldn't want this. Don't, Hartley's voice broke. Don't use David. I got him killed. Know that. Live with that. This is penance. This is evening scales. Scales don't even, Jack took a step closer. They just get heavier until they crush everyone. You do this, you become exactly what you hate. Terrorist who kills innocents to make point that gets lost in body count. I'm already what I hate. Hartley's finger touched detonator. Been that since Somalia. Since I executed those prisoners. Since I betrayed David. Since I let Volkov use me. This is just honesty, finally admitting what I am. Then be honest about who'll die. Jack pulled out phone, showed photo. This is Emma Bradley, senator's granddaughter. 7 years old. Loves horses. Wants to be veterinarian. She'll be at ceremony tomorrow because her grandfather served 3 tours in the Gulf. Gas will kill her first because children's lungs are smaller. She'll suffocate while adults watch helpless. That's your honesty. Hartley stared at photo. Hand trembled on detonator. This is Marcus Webb Jr. Sarah's voice joined. 23. Journalist following his father's footsteps. Covering funeral because he believes telling stories about service matters. Gas will kill him before he understands what's happening. Stop. This is Colonel Patricia Hayes, Jack continued relentlessly. 64. Served 40 years. Lost husband in Iraq. Son in Afghanistan. Still believes in duty despite everything. Deserves to bury Senator Bradley, who was her mentor, without dying herself. I said stop. These are people, James, not symbols, not abstractions, human beings with families and futures and flaws. Same as us, same as everyone we've lost. Killing them doesn't balance anything. Just adds weight you'll carry until it crushes you. Hartley's hand moved away from detonator, fell to side. His body sagged like strings had been cut. I'm so tired, Jack. So tired of fighting. Tired of pretending it matters. Tired of waking up knowing I betrayed everything I believed in. I know, Jack moved closer, weapon lowered, seeing broken man instead of threat. We're all tired, all carrying weight that shouldn't belong to individuals. But we don't get to stop carrying it by passing weight to innocence. What's the point then? Hartley's voice was barely whisper. If we can't fix system, can't stop wars, can't make sacrifice mean something, what's the point of continuing? Maybe there isn't one. Jack reached Hartley, placed hand on his shoulder. Maybe Catherine and David died for nothing. Maybe Chen wasted his life. Maybe we're all fools who believe beautiful lies. But maybe choosing not to kill today is enough. Maybe that's all honor means. Not doing worst thing when worst thing is easiest. Hartley looked at equipment, at detonator, at decades of planning that would accomplish nothing except adding bodies to count already too high. You'll arrest me. Send me to Supermax. Life sentence or execution. Probably. But you'll be alive, still human, still capable of choosing different path even in prison. What path? What's left? Truth, Sarah spoke. You testify. Name everyone in network. Expose all the corruption. Make your betrayal mean something by ensuring its last betrayal. Be witness instead of murderer. Hartley looked at her. At Jack. At tunnel that would have been tomb for thousands. Made decision that would define whatever remained of his life. Okay, disarm it, show you everything, tell you everything. Just promise me David's death won't be forgotten. That it means something and can't promise that. Jack's honesty was brutal, but I can promise we'll try to make it mean something. That's all anyone can do. Try. Hartley moved to equipment with hands that shook, showed them deactivation sequence, explained network structure, named contacts in Volkov's organization. Gave up secrets that would take years to fully process. Sarah called Morrison. Used careful language about situation contained and assets secured. Morrison's relief was audible through phone. Federal agents arrived 30 minutes later. Took Hartley into custody with efficiency that suggested they'd been positioned nearby waiting for signal. Secured gas equipment. Began processing scene that would be classified and disappeared from any public record. Morrison arrived personally. looked at Jack and Sarah with expression mixing gratitude and calculation. You stopped it. Saved thousands. Country owes you debt it can't acknowledge. Country owes us nothing. Jack was exhausted. 62 years old and spending nights in cemetery tunnels, stopping chemical attacks felt like cosmic joke. We did what needed doing, that's all. What happens to Hartley? Life sentence. Classified facility. But he talks. He gives us everything. Maybe conditions improve? Maybe. Morrison looked at tunnel entrance. What did you say to him? What changed his mind? Reminded him that honor isn't complicated. It's choosing not to kill when you can. Everything else is philosophy. Morrison nodded slowly. Chen would have liked that definition. Chen would have hated all of this. Jack started walking towards surface, but he'd understand it. Difference matters. They emerged into cemetery where dawn was beginning to paint sky. Headstones stretched in rows that testified to service and sacrifice and all the complicated violence that came with defending nation that sometimes deserved defending and sometimes didn't. Sarah stood beside him, looking at graves. Think they'd understand, the people buried here? What we just prevented. Some would, some wouldn't. Jack thought about this honestly. Some died believing in noble cause. Some died knowing it was complicated. Most just died following orders and hoping it mattered. Does it matter? Thousands of people will attend funeral today and go home alive. Their families won't bury them. Their children won't grow up without parents. Maybe that's only kind of mattering that counts. Sarah nodded. David would say that's enough. David would say a lot of things. Jack's voice carried weight, and I'd give everything to hear them again. They drove away from Arlington as morning commute began. Washington waking today it didn't know had almost been last for thousands of people. Normalcy proceeding because threat had been contained by people who would never be acknowledged for preventing disaster that never officially existed. Morrison had offered them return to quiet life, promised no more calls, no more operations. Real retirement this time with understanding that some debts could never be repaid, but could at least be honored through absence of further demands. Jack didn't believe it. Knew that retirement was fiction Morrison sold when convenient. That next crisis would bring next call. That cycle continued until you died or became too broken to useful. But maybe that was okay. Maybe purpose wasn't found in endings, but in continuous choosing. Day after day, operation after operation, time after time saying yes when no felt easier. Sarah dropped him at airport where commercial flight would return him to Montana and horses and Catherine's grave. Handed him phone number written on paper that looked ancient in digital age. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I owe David that much. Owe you more. You don't owe me anything. Jack took the paper. But I'll call if I need. And you call me when the weight gets too heavy. When you need to talk to someone who understands. Deal. He watched her drive away toward career that would probably consume her the way it consumed everyone. Hoped she'd survive with soul intact. Hoped David's lessons would protect her where Jack's had failed. The flight home was turbulence and strangers and thoughts that wouldn't organize into anything resembling peace. Jack stared out window at America passing below. Farmland and cities and infrastructure that existed because people built it and maintained it and believed it mattered. Maybe they were right. Maybe it did matter. Not in grand way politicians claimed, but in small way of keeping things running, preventing disasters, making tomorrow possible. Montana appeared finally. Mountains that had witnessed millennium of human struggle and would witness millennium more. Jack's truck sat in long-term parking where he'd left it. Started on first try, despite weeks of neglect. American engineering or luck or both. The ranch looked exactly as he'd left it. Horses needed feeding. Catherine's grave needed visiting. Whiskey waited in kitchen where he'd left bottle half empty. But something felt different. Not the place. The man returning to it. Jack stood on porch watching sunset paint. Sky colors Catherine had tried to capture in paintings that never quite succeeded because some things were too beautiful to trap in art. Thought about week that had just passed. About Hartley and Morrison and Sarah. About David and Chen and all the ghosts he carried. Thought about honor and duty and whether any of it mattered when systems were corrupt and outcomes were predetermined and best you could hope for was preventing worst excesses of machinery that ground everyone into fuel for its continuation. Catherine's voice in memory, soft and certain. It matters because you choose to make it matter. That's all honor ever was. Daily choice to try. He fed the horses, visited Catherine's grave, Told her about Boston and Arlington and Hartley. Told her that he was tired but not done, that tomorrow would bring something new to face. That retirement was fiction, but maybe that was okay because purpose was better than peace. The whiskey bottle sat on counter where he'd left it. Jack looked at it for a long moment, picked it up, poured it down sink until bottle was empty. Catherine would approve. David would too. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. Old pattern. 3 rings, disconnect, wait, repeat. Jack let it ring. Let whoever needed him wait. Tomorrow was soon enough for whatever came next. Tonight he'd sleep in his own bed, dream his own dreams, carry his own weight with understanding that weight was proof of having lived, not evidence of failing to live properly. He was 62 years old, retired operator who kept getting unretired, widower who talked to graves, father who'd outlived his son, ghost who haunted himself more effectively than any enemy could. But he was still here, still choosing, still believing that choosing mattered even when outcomes were uncertain. That would have to be enough, because it was all any of them had: the trying, the continuing, the refusal to let weight crush you completely even when it felt impossible to keep standing. Jack Morrison closed his eyes, let exhaustion that had been building finally catch up, slept without dreams or ghosts or anything except the silence that came from knowing tomorrow would bring new battle. But tonight was his own. Outside, stars wielded in patterns unchanged since humans first learned to wage war. Mountains stood witness to struggles that meant everything to participants and nothing to geology. Time moved forward because time didn't know how to do anything else. And somewhere in D.C., Morrison planned next operation. Somewhere in federal detention, Hartley gave testimony that would take years to verify. Somewhere in Atlantic, Volkov waited in Supermax for extraction that wouldn't come. The machine continued, always continued, fed by people who believed serving it meant something, maintained by operators who couldn't imagine alternative, justified by results that were measured in prevented disasters rather than actual victories. Jack Morrison had been part of that machine for 40 years, had maintained it, fed it, bled for it, had learned too late that machine consumed everything given to it and asked for more. But maybe understanding that was victory enough. Maybe recognizing machinery while choosing to prevent worst excesses was all honor meant in corrupt system. Maybe that was enough, had to be enough, because the alternative was becoming Hartley, becoming monster you fought because fighting broke something fundamental and mercy felt like weakness. Jack refused that fate, refused to let weight transform him into weapon aimed at innocence, refused to solve complexity through violence against people who didn't choose their participation in system any more than he'd chosen his. Refused to stop trying just because trying felt impossible. That refusal, that continuing despite knowledge of futility, that was honor. Catherine had understood. David too. Chen had died believing it. And Jack Morrison, old ghost, last warrior, tired operator who should have died dozen times over, would honor their memory by continuing until he couldn't anymore. Then he'd rest. Finally rest. Join Catherine and David wherever dead warriors went when service finally ended. But not yet, not quite yet. Tomorrow would come soon enough. With it, new demands, new operations, new weights to carry. Tonight was for rest, for silence, for a brief moment of peace before storm resumed. He'd earned that much, maybe more, but that much at least. The last ghost closed his eyes, let silence take him. Dreamed nothing, rested. 6 months after Arlington, Jack Morrison woke to Montana sunrise that painted his bedroom the color of Catherine's eyes when she laughed, which had been often before cancer taught them both that some battles couldn't be won through willpower alone. The horses were already awake, their sounds drifting through window that had been open all night because closed spaces reminded him too much of cells and coffins, in all the confined places where men went to die. He dressed slowly, joints protesting with arithmetic of age that calculated cost of every movement. 62 going on ancient body-keeping score that mind tried to ignore. The mirror showed gray hair that had been black once, scars that told stories he'd stopped sharing, eyes that had seen too much and somehow kept seeing more. The phone on his nightstand stayed silent. Had been silent for 173 days. Not that he was counting. Morrison had kept her word this time. No calls. No operations, no demands that retirement be suspended for emergencies that only old warriors could address. The silence should have been relief. Instead felt like abandonment, like being told you were finally useless after a lifetime of being used. Jack fed the horses with routine that had become meditation. Brush coat, check hooves, fill water, simple tasks that required presence, not violence. The kind of life Catherine had wanted for him, the kind David had never gotten to choose. Sarah called while he was making coffee that tasted like history and regret. Her voice carried exhaustion that 6 months hadn't erased. How are you holding up? Jack looked at empty ranch house that held more ghosts than furniture. Same as yesterday, same as tomorrow probably. You? Busy. Morrison has me training new operatives, teaching them tradecraft, trying to prevent next generation from making our mistakes. Can't prevent mistakes, only learn from them after. Cheerful as ever, Sarah's smile was audible. David said you were like this, philosophical pessimist who somehow kept fighting. David was kind in his descriptions. Jack sat at kitchen table Catherine had picked out 30 years ago. How's the testimony going? Hartley's giving everything. Names, operations, networks that go back decades. It's bigger than we thought. Corruption wasn't just JSOC, it was systematic, built into structure. Systems protect themselves, always have. Yeah, but this time someone's documenting it. Marcus Webb is building case with Hartley's testimony. Constitutional violations, war crimes, illegal surveillance. Everything Chen died trying to expose. When does it go public? That's complicated. Sarah's hesitation spoke volumes. Webb wants to publish now. Morrison wants to wait. Says timing matters. That releasing everything at once causes chaos that helps no one. Morrison wants to control narrative. Same thing she's always wanted. Maybe. Sarah sounded tired. Or maybe she's right that some truths need context. That dumping classified files without explanation causes more harm than good. Chen wouldn't agree. Chen's dead. We're not. Difference means something. Jack thought about this. About responsibility to dead versus responsibility to living. About whether honoring memory meant following their path or learning from their mistakes. What do you think? What would David do? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I think David would say truth matters, but so does how truth is revealed. That explosion of information isn't same as education. That maybe Morrison's right about timing, even if her motivations are wrong. When did you become diplomat? When I realized righteous anger doesn't save lives, just makes you feel better while situation stays broken. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Weather, horses, mundane details of life that continued despite everything. When Sarah hung up, silence returned heavier than before. Jack spent the afternoon at Catherine's grave telling her about conversation, about Sarah's growth, about the weight he still carried and probably always would. He'd started bringing chairs 6 months ago because kneeling had become impossible, and standing for extended periods made his back announce that gravity was winning. I miss you. Simple truth that felt inadequate. Miss your laugh. Miss your wisdom. Miss the way you made me believe I was more than a collection of scars and regrets. The stone offered no reply. Never did. But speaking to it felt necessary. Like maintaining conversation that death had interrupted, but not ended. What would you do about Webb's files? About Morrison's timing? About whether truth matters more than consequences? Wind through trees that had stood longer than nation. Sound that could be interpreted as answer or just physics. Jack chose to hear it as Catherine reminding him that some questions didn't have answers, only choices. And choices revealed character more reliably than intentions. He drove into town for supplies he didn't need because town meant people, and people meant distraction from thoughts that circled endlessly. Hardware store, grocery, post office where Mrs. Henderson asked about his health with concern that made him uncomfortable because he'd spent career being invisible, and visibility felt like exposure. The newspaper stand outside post office showed headline about Senate hearings into intelligence failures, about calls for accountability, about unnamed sources providing evidence of systematic corruption. Webb's work starting to surface. Controlled leaks building toward disclosure that would either change everything or change nothing, depending on how cynical you felt about institutions reforming themselves. Jack bought paper and coffee from diner that had been there since before he was born. Sat in booth that had probably held every crisis and celebration town had witnessed. Read article that carefully avoided naming names while making clear that something rotten existed at highest levels. The waitress, Betty, who'd been serving coffee since Jack was teenager, topped off his cup without asking. You look tired, Jack. More than usual. Just old, Betty. That's what happens when you survive long enough. My Harold made it to 83. She sat down across from him, uninvited, which meant she had something to say. Said the secret wasn't living long. It was knowing when to let go of what was killing you from inside. Harold was wise man. Harold was stubborn fool who held grudges for 30 years. She smiled sadly. Didn't learn until the end that letting go wasn't weakness, was survival. Jack thought about weight he carried. Wondered if letting go was possible or if some burdens became part of you. Structural. Remove them and you collapsed. How do you let go of responsibility, of debt to the dead? Betty's hand covered his, worn and weathered like his own. You don't, but you learn to carry it different, not as punishment, as reminder that you're still here, still capable of choosing what comes next. She left him with coffee and wisdom that felt true even if implementation seemed impossible. Jack sat in booth reading newspaper until words blurred together, and exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical tiredness suggested going home. The drive back to ranch took him past cemetery where David's memorial stood among others who'd died in service. Jack stopped without planning to, found himself walking among stones that testified to sacrifice and loss, and the terrible arithmetic of war that never quite balanced. David's marker was simple: name, rank, dates that were too close together. No epitaph because Jack hadn't been able to find words adequate to life cut short. Catherine had chosen inscription for her own stone. Beloved wife and mother, she who taught us to see light. Perfect for her. Impossible to match for son who died before reaching the fullness of who he might have become. Jack knelt with difficulty, his body protested. Placed hand on stone that was cold despite afternoon sun. Sarah's doing well. She's strong, like you were, like your mother was. She's going to be fine. The stone offered no reply, but Jack continued anyway. I stopped Hartley, prevented the attack, saved thousands of people who'll never know how close they came to dying. Morrison says that's enough, that I've done my part, can rest now. He paused, searching for words that felt true. But I don't know how to rest. Don't know who I am without the mission. Catherine tried to teach me. You tried to show me. I never learned. Wind through cemetery. Birds that didn't care about human grief. Life continuing with indifference that was either cruel or merciful depending on perspective. Webb's going to publish files. Everything Chen gathered, everything Hartley testified to, it's going to be bad, really bad. Careers ending, people going to prison, maybe even criminal charges for operations we all participated in. And I don't know if that's justice or just revenge wearing better suit. Jack stood slowly, joints protesting, age demanding acknowledgement. I love you, son. Miss you every day. Hope wherever you are, you understand why I keep going. Why I can't stop even though every part of me wants to. He returned to truck that had seen better days but still started reliably. Drove home through landscape that had witnessed century and a half of American expansion, settlement, and all the violence and hope that came with building nation from principles that sounded better than they practiced. The ranch appeared as sun-touched horizon, painting sky colors that reminded Jack of blood and fire, and every sunset he'd watch from places where tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. He'd watch sunsets from Mogadishu rooftops, from Iraqi desert, from Afghan mountains, from Syrian compounds, always wondering if this one was last. Now he watched from Montana ranch and still wondered. Different threat, same uncertainty. The phone rang as he reached porch. Unknown number, pattern he recognized. 3 rings, disconnect, wait, repeat. Signal that meant official business wrapped in deniability. He answered expecting Morrison. Got Marcus Webb instead. Jack Morrison, we need to talk, in person, tonight if possible. I'm retired. This isn't about operation. This is about choice. About what happens when truth becomes public. About whether you want to be part of story or footnote to it. Jack thought about hanging up. About letting whatever Webb planned happen without his input. About finally, truly walking away from world that had consumed 4 decades of his life. But Catherine's voice in memory, Betty's wisdom in diner, the weight he carried that was proof of living, not evidence of failing. Where and when? Billings. Hotel off I-90, room 304. 2,200 hours. Come alone. This conversation doesn't exist. Jack disconnected. Looked at ranch that represented every choice he'd made since Catherine died. Stay here and let history unfold without him. Or drive 3 hours to meeting that probably meant more complications when complications were last thing he needed. He fed the horses early, checked weapons he'd sworn he wouldn't need again, wrote note for Sarah in case things went wrong, placed it in envelope, with instructions that felt like will, but wasn't labeled as such because labeling made it real. The drive to Billings was memory lane through landscape he'd known entire life, towns he'd grown up near, roads he'd traveled before military consumed him, America that had changed and stayed the same in ways that were both comforting and disturbing. Webb was exactly what Chen had described. Late 50s, gray hair, eyes that suggested he'd seen through so many lies that truth became default assumption. He opened hotel room door with caution that spoke to career spent exposing people who preferred shadows. Jack Morrison, Webb gestured him inside. Thanks for coming. The room was standard chain hotel, functional, anonymous, designed for business travelers who needed bed and Wi-Fi but no character. Laptop sat open on desk, showing documents that Jack recognized immediately as classified intelligence files. Chen gave you everything. Everything and more. Webb poured coffee from pot that had been sitting too long. 40 years of operations, hundreds of pages documenting corruption, illegal surveillance, constitutional violations, war crimes disguised as necessary evils. When does it publish? That's what I need to discuss. Webb sat in chair that probably came with room. I can publish tomorrow. Every major outlet would pick it up. Biggest intelligence leak since Snowden. Careers destroyed, investigations launched, reforms demanded. But I've been doing this 30 years. Seen what happens when classified information dumps without context. Initial outrage, then fatigue, then conspiracy theories. Then nothing changes except people who expose truth end up in prison or exile while system adapts and continues. So you want to wait, control release, manage narrative the way Morrison would. Webb's smile was tired. No, I want to do something different. Something Chen and I discussed before he died. I want testimony, human stories, context that makes data meaningful instead of just overwhelming. You want me to go on record? Jack understood immediately. Understood the ask and its implications. Going public meant ending any pretense of deniability. Meant facing consequences for operations that existed in legal gray zones. Meant becoming target for everyone who preferred truth stayed buried. I'm old man who followed orders. What makes my story matter? Because you're not just operator, you're symbol. Webb pulled up files showing Jack's service record. 40 years, multiple wars, decorated, respected, everything American military claims to be. If you say system is broken, people listen. If you testify about corruption, about illegal operations, about orders that violated Constitution, it's not conspiracy theory. It's truth from someone who lived it. Jack thought about this, about exposure versus anonymity, about owing debt to dead versus protecting peace he'd barely started building. What does Morrison say about this? She doesn't know. Webb's honesty was refreshing, and she can't know until it's too late to stop. That's why timing matters. That's why I need your decision tonight. What happens if I refuse? Files published without context. Data dump that causes brief scandal, then gets buried under next crisis. Chen's death means nothing. Hartley's testimony gets classified. Nothing changes except people like us become targets for system protecting itself. And if I agree, you testify before Senate Committee Webb was helping establish. Closed session initially, then public. Give human face to data. Explain operations from inside. Make it impossible for system to dismiss as disgruntled whistleblower or foreign propaganda. Then what? Prison? Prosecution? Spending my last years fighting legal battles? Maybe. Webb's voice was level. Or maybe you become catalyst for actual reform. Maybe next generation of operators doesn't face choices you faced. Maybe system learns that accountability matters. You really believe that? Webb was quiet for a long moment. Chen did. He died believing that truth could change things. That exposure forced evolution. That institutional rot could be treated if diagnosed properly. Jack walked a window overlooking parking lot where America conducted business of living. People checking in, checking out. Moving between temporary spaces with problems that had nothing to do with classified operations or constitutional violations. Catherine would tell me to do right thing. David would say honor matters more than comfort. But they're dead and I'm not. I get to live with consequences. They don't. What would Chen say? That I'm the only one left who can make this mean something. That all the ghosts I carry deserve to have their deaths count for more than just body count. Jack turned from window, faced Webb and decision that felt inevitable, even as he wished it wasn't. I'll testify, but on my terms. No grandstanding, no political theater, just truth about what happened, why it happened, and what needs to change to prevent it happening again. Fair enough. Webb extended hand. Chen said you'd do the right thing eventually. Said you just needed time to see what right thing was. Chen had more faith than I deserve. He had faith in people who kept trying when trying seemed pointless. Webb's handshake was firm. That's you, whether you see it or not. Jack left hotel as midnight approached. Drove through darkness that felt appropriate for decision that would either matter or disappear into noise that defined modern discourse. He'd chosen to testify, chosen to expose system he'd served, chosen to make peace with consequences that came with truth-telling. The ranch appeared in headlights that illuminated familiar landscape, home, sanctuary, place he'd probably lose once testimony became public, and Morrison deployed resources to discredit him. But losing ranch was price worth paying if it meant Chen's death accomplished something. If it meant David's sacrifice had context beyond classified file. If it meant next generation of Sarahs didn't face same impossible choices. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams where Catherine asked if he was sure. Where David questioned whether exposure changed anything. Where Chen nodded approval that felt like absolution. Morning brought phone call from Morrison exactly as Jack expected. Her voice carried fury that transcended professional disagreement and became personal vendetta. Webb contacted you. Don't lie, he's planning to publish and you're helping him. I'm testifying to Senate committee about operations I participated in. Ones that probably violated Constitution. Ones that got good people killed for bad reasons. You're throwing away 40 years of service. Morrison's voice was ice. Destroying your reputation. Ending up in prison or worse. For what? Idealistic notion that truth matters? For possibility that maybe it does. Maybe system can be reformed. Maybe next operator doesn't face choices I've faced. You're naive. System doesn't reform. It consumes reformers and continues. You're just making yourself target. Maybe, but I'm dying anyway. Cancer diagnosis came back last week. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. Rather spend it trying to fix what's broken than protecting what's rotten. The silence online stretched long enough that Jack thought connection died. Then Morrison spoke with something approaching respect. You're really dying? Everyone's dying, Colonel. I just have timeline. Another pause, then Morrison's voice changed. Softer, almost human. I can't protect you. Can't stop what's coming. But Jack, for what it's worth, I understand why you're doing this. Doesn't mean I agree, but I understand. That's all I ask. Morrison disconnected. Jack sat with phone feeling lighter than he had in months. Maybe years. Decision made. Consequences accepted. Path clear, even if destination remained uncertain. Sarah arrived 3 hours later, driving faster than legal limit allowed, face showing mixture of anger and concern that suggested she'd heard about testimony plan. You're really doing this. Not question, statement. Yes, without consulting me, without thinking about how this affects everyone who served with you. Can't live my life based on how it affects others. Jack met her eyes. Spent career doing that, taking orders, following protocol, sacrificing personal judgment for institutional good. Where'd it get us? Chen dead, David dead, corruption continuing. At some point, you have to choose individual conscience over collective compromise. Sarah sat heavily in chair that had been Catherine's favorite. This destroys everything. Every operation gets scrutinized. Every decision questioned. People who trusted you feel betrayed. People who trusted me should feel betrayed. We participated in a system that valued secrecy over accountability, that classified crimes as necessary operations, that consumed soldiers and called it service. You sound like Hartley. Jack flinched but didn't look away. Maybe Hartley was right about system being broken. Wrong about solution, but right about problem. So your solution is testimony, public exposure, hoping Senate does something with information. My solution is being witness. Chen gathered evidence. Webb provides platform. Hartley supplies corroboration. I give it human face. Make it undeniable. Force conversation about accountability. And if nothing changes, if you sacrifice everything and system adapts and continues, then at least I tried. At least I chose conscience over convenience. That has to count for something. Sarah stood, paced, wrestled with anger and understanding that competed for dominance. Finally spoke with voice that carried weight of decision she'd been avoiding. I'm testifying too. Everything I know, everything I've seen, every operation that crossed lines. If you're burning bridges, I'm helping. Sarah, no. You have career, future. Don't throw it away for this. My career is built on foundation of lies. My future requires believing an institution that's fundamentally corrupt. If I stay silent now, if I let you do this alone, then David trained me for nothing. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from consequences he'd accepted for himself. But looking at her, he saw determination that transcended logic or persuasion. She'd made choice same way he had, based on principle that mattered more than comfort. Okay, but we do this smart. Legal representation, preparation, making sure testimony is undeniable and documented. Webb's already arranging it. Lawyers who specialize in whistleblower protection, media coordination, everything Chen planned before he died. Of course he did. Jack smiled despite everything. Chen was always 3 steps ahead. The Senate hearing happened 6 weeks later in room designed for secrecy. Closed session initially. Recording devices forbidden. Only senators cleared for highest classifications present. Security that suggested either protection or containment, depending on perspective. Jackie sat at a table that had hosted countless hearings about matters citizens never learned about. Sarah beside him, Webb behind them with lawyers who'd spent weeks preparing testimony that walked line between truth-telling and self-incrimination. Senator Richard Bradley, no relation to the senator whose funeral had almost been massacred, led questioning with precision, suggesting he'd spent career prosecuting rather than legislating. Mr. Morrison, you served 40 years in naval special warfare, participated in classified operations spanning multiple administrations. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And during that service, did you witness or participate in operations that violated constitutional protections, international law, or rules of engagement? Jack took breath that felt like jumping from aircraft, point of no return, commitment that couldn't be recalled. Yes, sir, I witnessed and participated in operations that I now believe violated both domestic and international law. Operations that were classified to protect institutional interests rather than national security. The room shifted, senators leaning forward, staffers suddenly alert. Webb behind him nodding approval that felt like Chen speaking through time. For the next 8 hours, Jack testified, about operations in Somalia where prisoners were executed, about Syria where intelligence was falsified, about Afghanistan, where civilian casualties were miscounted deliberately, about Iraq, where constitutional restrictions were interpreted so broadly they became meaningless. He named dates, locations, commanding officers who'd approved operations, system that prioritized deniability over accountability, culture that punished whistleblowers more harshly than war criminals. Sarah corroborated, added details from operations he hadn't witnessed, painted picture of systematic dysfunction that went beyond few bad actors and revealed institutional rot. Senator Bradley's final question came as evening turned to night and exhaustion became liability for clarity. Mr. Morrison, knowing what you know now, knowing the consequences of this testimony, would you serve again? Jack thought about Catherine, about David, about 40 years of choices that accumulated into life he barely recognized as his own. Yes, sir, I'd serve again, but differently. With eyes open to what I was participating in, with willingness to refuse illegal orders, with understanding that conscience matters more than career. Even if serving differently meant court-martial, imprisonment, loss of everything you'd built, especially then, Jack's voice was steady, because service without conscience isn't service. It's participation in machinery that grinds people into justification for its continuation. I served that machinery, I fed it, I bled for it, and I got good people killed because I prioritized loyalty over legality. The silence that followed felt sacred, like confession in church, truth spoken in space designed for secrets. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Bradley's voice carried unexpected respect. This committee will adjourn to review testimony and determine next steps. Jack and Sarah left, building as night painted DC in shadows that seemed appropriate. Media waited outside despite closed session. Someone had leaked, probably Webb executing plan Chen had designed. Controlled disclosure building toward public hearing that would force accountability. Cameras flashed, questions shouted. Jack ignored them all, had said what needed saying. Everything else was implementation. They drove to a hotel where Webb waited with lawyers who looked simultaneously exhausted and energized. It went well, better than expected. Webb showed them initial media coverage. Conservative outlets calling it treason, liberal outlets calling it courage. Everyone else confused because nuance didn't fit narrative templates. What happens now? Now we wait. Public hearing scheduled in 3 months. Gives time for investigation, for corroboration, for opposition to build case. Then you testify again. Everything you said today, but publicly, on record, undeniable. And Morrison? She's already moving. Webb pulled up leaked memo, calling you compromised, suffering from PTSD, unreliable witness whose testimony is motivated by bitterness over son's death, standard discrediting playbook. Is it working? With some people. But Hartley's testimony corroborates yours. Documents Chen gathered support specifics. It's harder to dismiss when multiple sources confirm same patterns. Jack nodded, too tired to feel vindicated or concerned. He'd done what conscience demanded. Outcome was beyond his control. The next 3 months were warfare by different means. Media battles, legal maneuvering, Morrison deploying every resource to discredit testimony while Webb deployed evidence to support it. Jack became public figure, face of whistleblower movement he'd never intended to lead. Letters arrived at Ranch, some supporting, some threatening, death threats specific enough that FBI got involved despite his status as thorn in establishment's side. Veterans organizations debated whether he was hero or traitor. Answer depended on how much they valued order versus justice. Catherine's grave became refuge, place where he could speak without being recorded, without words being analyzed for political advantage. I hope I'm doing right thing. Hard to tell anymore. Everything's so complicated, so much noise, so much anger on all sides. Wind through cemetery, birds that had witnessed countless confessions to stone. David would understand, I think. Hope. He wanted to fix system, died trying to expose corruption. I'm finishing what he started. That has to count for something. The stone offered no opinion. Jack took that as permission to continue. Public hearing arrived with media circus that transformed constitutional process into entertainment. Cameras everywhere. Protesters outside. Security unprecedented for testimony about matters most Americans didn't understand and many didn't care about. Jack sat at same table as before. But this time room was full. Public gallery, media, citizens who'd taken time to witness democracy functioning or failing, depending on perspective. Senator Bradley opened with statement that attempted neutrality, but clearly leaned toward accountability. These hearings examine allegations of systematic misconduct within intelligence and special operations communities. Allegations that, if true, represent fundamental betrayal of constitutional principles. If false, represent dangerous undermining of institutions that protect national security. Jack testified again. Everything from closed session plus additional details declassified for public consumption. Hours of questioning that ranged from hostile to supportive, depending on senators' political alignment. The moment that went viral, that replayed on every news outlet and social media platform, came from Senator Margaret Chen, no relation to Robert, but sharing his commitment to institutional accountability. Mr. Morrison, you're dying. You have terminal cancer. Why not spend your remaining time in peace? Why put yourself through this? Jack thought about answer that was true enough to matter. Because peace without purpose isn't peace. It's waiting to die. I've spent career following orders, making compromises, choosing institutional loyalty over individual conscience. And it cost me everything that mattered. My wife died while I was deployed. My son died because I taught him to serve without questioning. My friends died protecting system that consumed them. He paused. Room silent except for cameras clicking. I can't get them back. Can't undo choices I made. But I can maybe prevent next generation from making same mistakes. Can maybe force conversation about accountability that should have happened decades ago. That's worth whatever time I have left. The clip played on every network. Conservative commentators called it emotional manipulation. Liberal commentators called it moral courage. Everyone else debated whether dying man's testimony was more or less credible because he had nothing to lose. Webb used moment to release Chen's files. Complete document dump coordinated with testimony. Overwhelming evidence that took news cycle for weeks. Too much information to process. Too many implications to address. Exactly what Webb had warned about, but strategically deployed when public was paying attention. Morrison testified 3 days later. Defended institutional decisions. Argued that operations were legal under authorities granted. Insisted that individual operators like Jack were compromised by PTSD and grief. Standard playbook executed flawlessly. But something had shifted. Public wasn't buying complete denial anymore. Too much evidence, too many corroborating witnesses. Too much of pattern that suggested systematic rather than individual problems. Congress authorized investigation, Inspector General, independent commission, reforms proposed, some symbolic, some substantive, most somewhere in between. Jack returned to Montana as media storm continued without him. He'd said what needed saying, done what conscience demanded. Everything else was beyond his control. The ranch felt different, still home, but no longer sanctuary. Phone rang constantly. Media requests, death threats, interview proposals, book offers, speaking engagements. Everyone wanting peace of man who'd chosen conscience over career. Jack ignored most of it, accepted few, spoke to veteran groups about accountability, about refusing illegal orders, about individual responsibility even within institutions. Some listeners agreed, some walked out. All of them wrestled with uncomfortable truths. Sarah visited monthly, testified herself, faced own consequences. Career limited but not ended. Morrison had enough sense to recognize that martyr-making was counterproductive. Sarah remained active duty but transferred to training command where her experience couldn't threaten operational security. 6 months after testimony, Jack received a letter from a address he didn't recognize. Opened it carefully because death threats had taught caution. Inside was handwritten note on paper that looked expensive. Mr. Morrison, you don't know me, but you saved my daughter's life. She was at Arlington that day for her grandfather's funeral. 7 years old, loves horses, wants to be veterinarian. Because you stopped that attack, she's still alive, still dreaming, still becoming whoever she's meant to be. I can never repay that debt, but I want you to know that everything you've suffered, every consequence you've faced, it was worth it. You gave my daughter future. Thank you, Emma's father. Jack read letter 3 times, placed it in wallet next to Catherine's faded painting and David's photo. Collection of reasons to continue when continuing felt impossible. The cancer progressed exactly as doctors predicted. Faster some weeks, slower others. Always forward, always toward inevitable conclusion. Jack refused aggressive treatment, chose quality over quantity, spent remaining time at ranch with horses and memories and occasional visitors who made peace seem possible. Betty from the diner brought meals weekly, refused payment, said Harold would have wanted someone looking after stubborn fool who didn't know when to accept help. Earl the trucker stopped by once, drove 300 miles out of his way to sit on porch and not talk about anything important. Shared coffee and silence that said everything necessary. Tariq sent letter from Syria, said he'd taken money Jack left him, started small business, hired locals, building life from rubble, said sometimes American kept promises. Marcus Webb visited month before the end, brought updates on reforms. Some passed, some stalled, some watered down until meaning was lost. Progress measured in inches when miles were needed. Was it worth it? Webb asked questions Jack had been avoiding. Everything you went through, everything you lost, did it change anything? Jack looked at mountains that would outlast every human struggle. Thought about Emma's letter, about Sarah carrying torch, about reforms that were imperfect but present. Ask me again in 50 years. See if changes stuck, if accountability became norm instead of exception, if next generation of operators learned lessons we paid for. What do you think will happen? Honestly, probably backslide. System will adapt, find new ways to hide corruption. But maybe it'll be harder. Maybe someone will remember that individuals can choose conscience, that institutional pressure isn't excuse, that following orders isn't defense. That's enough for you? Has to be. It's all any of us get. Small possibility that what we did mattered. The end came quietly, no drama, no final speeches, just body giving out while mind remained clear enough to understand what was happening. Sarah sat beside bed holding hand that had fired countless weapons and now could barely grip. Catherine's waiting. David too. Chen probably has whole briefing prepared about what I did wrong. Jack's smile was weak but genuine. You did good. Sarah's voice broke slightly. Changed things. Made difference. David would be proud. Maybe. Jack's breathing labored. Hope so. I know so. You taught me that honor isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing right thing even when it costs everything. You chose. Kept choosing until the end. That's all honor ever was. Jack closed eyes. Saw Catherine young and laughing. Saw David training Sarah. Saw Chen working through files that would outlive them all. Saw Volkov in hospital basement choosing redemption. Saw Hartley in cell choosing testimony. Saw all the ghosts he'd carried finally released. Tell Emma's father thank you for letter. Mattered more than he knows. I will. And Sarah, when you're my age, when you've carried this weight for decades, remember that letting go isn't failure. It's choosing to let next generation carry forward. Chen taught me that. Took too long to learn. I'll remember. Good. Jack's voice was fading. That's good. Now go. Live your life. Make better choices than I made. Fix what we broke. That's your mission. What if I fail? Then you try again. Keep trying until you can't. That's all service means. Continuing despite difficulty, choosing purpose over comfort. Sarah stayed as breathing slowed. As Jack Morrison, 62 years old, retired operator, widower, father, ghost who haunted himself, finally let go of weight he'd carried for 40 years. The funeral was private, Sarah's choice. Veterans attended, some who'd served with Jack, some who'd testified against him, all recognizing that complexity defined good men more often than clarity. Morrison came, stood in back, said nothing, left before reception. But presence acknowledged that despite everything, despite institutional conflict and testimony that damaged careers, soldiers recognized soldiers, even when they opposed each other, especially then. Webb published final article week later, obituary that was really meditation on conscience and service and price of choosing truth over comfort. It ended with Chen's words from letter he'd written before dying. Honor survives even when everything else rots. Jack Morrison proved that, not by being perfect, but by choosing conscience when career demanded compromise, by being witness when silence was easier, by continuing until he couldn't. That's all honor ever was. The continuing, the choosing, the refusing to let weight crush you completely, even when crushing seemed inevitable. 3 years after Jack's death, reforms he'd testified for became law. Watered down, compromised, imperfect, but present. Accountability mechanisms established. Oversight strengthened. Whistleblower protections enhanced. Not revolution, evolution. Inch toward justice when miles were needed. But inch was more than nothing. Sarah made Cornell, used position to implement training focused on ethical decision-making, on refusing illegal orders, on individual responsibility. Classes named Morrison Leadership Institute after man who taught her that conscience mattered. Emma Bradley graduated high school, still loved horses, still wanted to be veterinarian, wrote essay for college application about debt. She could never repay to man. She'd never met who'd saved her life by choosing right thing when wrong thing was easier. Morrison retired, wrote memoir that defended institutional decisions while acknowledging systematic failures, donated proceeds to veteran mental health programs, visited Catherine's grave once, apologized to Stone for everything, didn't expect forgiveness, sought only acknowledgement. Hartley remained in prison, testified at trials of others implicated by his revelations, became expert witness on intelligence corruption, found purpose in exposure after lifetime of secrecy, wrote letters to Sarah occasionally, always asked about Jack, always ended with same phrase, he was better man than I deserve to know. Volkov died in Supermax, heart attack, alone. But before dying, wrote letter to daughter explaining everything, apologizing for nothing but hoping understanding was possible. Daughter never responded, but kept letter. Sometimes read it. Wondered if father she'd rejected was more complicated than she'd believed. The ranch sold to family with children who loved horses and land. They kept Jack's study mostly intact. Photos of military service, Catherine's painting, David's memorial. Sometimes gave tours to veterans who wanted to see where the last ghost had lived his final years. Montana's sunrise painted sky colors that would make Catherine smile. Horses grazed in fields that had witnessed one man's struggle to find peace after a lifetime of war. Birds sang songs that had been sung before humans arrived and would continue after they departed. And somewhere in the space between memory and history, Jack Morrison rested. Finally free of weight, finally reunited with those he'd lost, finally able to acknowledge that he'd done enough, tried enough, chosen enough times to make choosing matter. The last ghost was finally home, mission complete. Service ended not in glory but in quiet recognition that honor survived when everything else failed. And in schools where future operators trained, in congressional hearings where accountability was debated, in hearts of people who chose conscience over convenience, his example remained. Not perfect, never perfect, but present, real. Proof that individual choice mattered even within corrupt systems. That continuing despite difficulty defined service more reliably than victory. That was legacy enough. Had to be, because it was true. And truth, as Chen had believed until death, as Jack had proven through testimony, as Sarah carried forward, was weapon more powerful than any government could contain. The last ghost had taught that lesson. Final mission completed, final choice made, final truth spoken. And in speaking it, in choosing it, in continuing until he couldn't, he'd shown that honor survived, dignity persisted, conscience mattered. That was everything, and it was enough. Finally, truly, completely enough. The end.